We thank you for the turnaround. We give you praise, we give you glory, and we give you honor. Name that is above every name, and let everyone say, Amen. Let us pray the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.
Good morning, Senators.
Good morning, Madam President.
I guess it's not a good morning for everyone. When we suspended at our last sitting, we adopted the minutes presented to senators. I think I would have sent a notice out indicating that a number of the women in the chamber had asked to give a brief intervention on the significance of the February 23rd date. And I think before we begin with the order of business, those senators who would like to speak at this time on the significance of the date of February 23rd may do so now.
Just for the record, the government is already registered to you. It's not objection to the proposed intervention. This is truly a commemoration of an extremely significant date. It really was the date when the Bahamas became a fully modern society. And so we look forward to hearing the interventions from our ladies on these matters.
Well, it's not restricted just to the ladies in the chamber.
Ladies first.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Mildred Hall Watson.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, fellow senators, good morning.
Good morning.
I stand in these hallowed chambers this morning with a lot of joy in my heart. Because of God's grace, for which I am always thankful, and it is also because of that same grace that He gave to a group of women many years ago, collectively and singularly, grace that strengthened and allowed them to demonstrate wisdom, understanding, truth, and discernment, persistence, and a will to persevere against great odds, love in a most unconditional way, unconditional because they fought not only for friends and family, but they fought for justice and equality for all Bahamian women. It is in large part their struggles that as we as Bahamian women who are supportive of our men can today celebrate the anniversary of the passage of the law that allowed women full participation in the electoral voting process today. The suffrage women paved the way for myself and all of my female colleagues, past and present, that and in the House of Assembly, as they did for many who preceded us and who will yet follow us. In the political realm, we must acknowledge some of these women. I would like to recognize Janet Boswick, Dame Ivy Dumont, Rome Italia Johnson, Theresa Moxie Ingram, Sylvia Scrivens, Allison Gibson, Sharon Wilson, Lynn Holowesco, and although not politically elected, Dame Marguerite Pinding. In the legal area, we must also recognize Dame Joan Sawyer, Dame Anita Allen, and specifically again, Mrs. Allison Gibson, who was our first female QC. Now, I'm sure if I am wrong, I will be corrected, but thank you. Thank you, Mr. Leader. And finally, Mrs. Eileen Johnson, who is the first female chaplain in either house. Time does not allow me to list many, many more individuals, but there are others who have not stood necessarily in the forefront in a political or legal way, who have made significant contributions to where we as women are today. I, however, want to mention just two names in that category, and that is Hilda Bowen, who many of you may not know, but she was the first Bahamian female of Caucasian or of color who was the chief nursing officer in our Bahamas. And I would also like to mention Mrs. Elma Garraway, who, as a permanent secretary in many, many ministries, was the epitome of a senior civil servant. I would like to complete before I complete my comments, I want to say a few words about you, my Bahamian women. As we go through the various stages of our life, first our youth and adolescence, our fertility and the childbearing years, our menopausal years, and our senior years, we must always be courageous, loving, caring, nurturing, and physically and economically supportive of each other. Each stage of our life requires a different kind of strength and risk-taking. Our suffragettes, no doubt, were at a risk-taking stage of their life and could take no more. So they did what needed to be done to allow us to do what we need to do today. And so today, as we stand on their shoulders, on their bulwark of courage and determination, committed to excellence as one group of people, Bahamian women, we must continue to evolve and recognize each other collectively and individually. Know that all the women whose names I called earlier, and who I may not have called, who supported their husbands, their sons, their nephews, their brothers, are just as important as the names that were spoken. They may not have been on the front line, but they were definitely in the line. I just want to mention someone who I know personally, Reverend Carl J. Ramey of St. Paul's Church in Foxville, consecrated as a bishop of his denomination. His wife, Mrs. Ramey, has been by his side during his entire sojourn as a pastor in this church. And not only did he carry the struggle, she also carried the struggle. She may not have the consecration, but she too will be Mrs. Bishop. So to all women, as we face new challenges in the home, the workplace, socially and spiritually, and as we live even longer in today's world, it is our responsibility to make good and positive choices for ourselves, for our children, born and unborn, and our Bahamaland. We must make these choices with compassion, tenacity, respect, and know that deep within that we are enhancing the lives of ourselves, our gender, our partners, and our country. We do this work for all who travel this journey with us, and we are guided always by the Holy Spirit. And so, Madam President, fellow senators, Bahamians all, I am delighted and filled with joy to acknowledge the anniversary, which takes place tomorrow, February 23rd, of the passage of an act to enable women to have and exercise rights of registration as voters and of voting similar to those accorded to men under the provisions of the General Assembly Elections Act 1959. Thank you, Madam President.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jo Beth Colby Davis.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, today I proudly stand in commemoration of the anniversary of the passage of the General Assembly Act that allow women to vote in the Bahamas. There was a movement that took place in this Bahamas with a number of women fighting for our rights. Some of them, Mary Ingram, Georgina Simonet, Eugenia Lockhart, and Dr. Doris Johnson. Few of the names that took place in this movement. And during the years 1959 and 1960, the suffrage movement gained considerable ground, advancing petitions and demonstrating publicly for the right of women to vote in the Bahamas. In November 1960, Eugenia Lockhart and Dr. Doris Johnson accompanied Henry Taylor and traveled to London to present a petition to the Secretary of State for the colonies. And in January 1961, a select committee of the House of Assembly gave a report in favor of the right to vote for women. But it was with effect from January 1963. This was outrightly opposed, and an appeal was made to the House of Commons in England again, and on February 23rd, a bill to enable women to vote was enacted with effect from January 30th, 1962. And Bahamian women voted for the first time on November 26, 1962. At that time, when these women and some of our men were fighting for the rights of women to change to allow us to vote in the Bahamas, there was no concern about the color of your skin. All women were not allowed to vote. It mattered not if you were white or black. And this included women from all classes and all parts of the country. They were mocked, they were laughed at, they were shunned, and yet still they did not give up. So while we celebrate this triumph for women to vote in the Bahamas, let us continue to remind the people the importance of exercising their rights at every opportunity. Because while we still have lots of work to do in terms of the rights for women, it was not an easy road to get where we are. And women, remember, we can only vote now because of what the suffragettes sacrificed back then. They did it for us, and we have to honor them by continuing to vote. And so at this time, I want to celebrate the anniversary of the General Assembly being passed for the right of women to vote. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Senator. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jenny Dotson Isaacs.
Michelle Obama says success is only meaningful and enjoyable if it feels like your own. Madam President and fellow senators and the Bahamas, good morning. Today on February 23rd, 1961, 57 years ago, is the anniversary of the passage of the General Assembly Act that allowed women to vote in the Bahamas. The bill called in an act to enable women to have and exercise rights of registration as voters and of voting similar to those afforded to men under the provisions of the General Assembly Elections Act 1959. was passed into effect June 30th, 1962. Therefore, today we celebrate February 23rd as the anniversary of the passage of the General Assembly Act that allowed women to vote for the first time in the Bahamas. Madam President, notable women such as Dame Doris Johnson, Mary Ingram, Eugenia Lockhart, Mabel Walker, Georgina Simonet, Lillian Isaacs, Dame Bertha Isaacs, has made countless triumphs towards the equal rights of all women in the Bahamas. In particular, all of these women mentioned before were major persons in the women's suffragist movement in the Bahamas. This movement's main purpose was to ensure that all women have equal rights in our country, such as the right to vote. However, this is not the only thing that resulted in the hard work of the women who were a part of this movement. In fact, even the amount of times you could have voted and the men's vote was affected positively through the efforts of the women's suffragist movement. Because of the women's suffragist movement, positive effects on the voting of all citizens, we can clearly see that their pivotal role was what we would call a quiet revolution. Madam President, on June 23, 1961, Mary Ingram encouraged all women to register to vote in a radio broadcast. And on July 12, 1962, Ruby Ann Cooper was the first woman to register. On the date, November 1962, Doris Johnson contested a seat in the elections but did not win. On November 26, 1962, women of 21 years and over voted for the first time in the Bahamas. I must say, the trade union movement was also pivotal in this movement. Very specifically, I will speak of Sir Randall Fox, president of the Bahamas Federation of Labor. Madam President, in the trade union movement, women have always been involved, however, but we've played more of a support role. They never held any key positions. They provided advice to men. They stayed in the background. They were always the secretary and did not hold any significant position. Provided the food, we were good at frying chicken and tongue fritters. This was the traditional attitude of men and women towards their respective roles in society. The lack of equal education and training, vocational guidance and counseling in the schools, the division of the labor market into traditionally male and female sectors, and the lack of childcare facilities for working mothers all contributed to this attitude. Madam President, however, women in the trade union movement begin to break the glass ceiling. We see when Mrs. Mabel Walker in 1947 became the founder and first female president of the Bahamas Union of Teachers, and the first female to be president of a trade union in the Bahamas. She worked hard for the recognition of the union and for teachers to be recognized as professionals. She was adamant about the training of teachers and fought for better salaries. Along with her also in 1947 was Dame Ivy Dumont, who was the founding Secretary General of the Bahamas Union of Teachers. Building on that foundation that Mabel Walker and Dame Ivy laid, we have had in 1965 Susan Wallace, who was the Secretary General of the BUT, Willamette Bridgewater, past president of the BCPOU, Idina Burrows, past president of BCPOU, Teresa Hyler, vice president of BPSU, Zenaida Dorset, Secretary General of BPSU, Araminta Butler, treasurer of the Bahamas Hotel Catering and Allied Workers Union. We have still today Teresa Mortimer, president of the BFSU, and I must remember, of course, Sister Nellorraine Harding, who was passed on to our earthly reward, president of AAAW. We had Carmen Munnings Kemp, president of Busawu. Ida Poitier-Turnquest, past president of BUT. Belinda Wilson, who is the current president of BUT. Nicole Martin, president of the Hotel Union. Rosalie McKenzie, president of the Bahamas Commercial Stores and Warehouse Union. LaShawn Gray, who was a past president of air traffic controllers, Sharon Martin, who is a past president of NIB-UPO, Cassandra Lewis, who is currently the president of PMU, Ms. Jewel Fountain, the current president of AAAW, of course, the Honorable Cleola Hamilton, who is the past president of the Bahamas Nurses Union, Jana Kalfani, who is the past president of the Nurses Union, and the current president, Amantia Williams. We also had Donnell Ferguson, president of the Bahamas Hotel Maintenance and Allied Workers Union, and Michelle Dossett, president of the Commonwealth Union of Services and Allied Workers Union. And as my good brother in trade union movement say, of course, myself, who served as president of UTEP, the first female to do that, the first female. And of course, the first woman to serve as president of the National Congress of Trade Unions Bahamas, and also currently the president of the Caribbean Congress of Labor, the first Bahamian female to serve as president. We must also remember, of course, Janet Boswick, Sylvia Scriven, Lynn Holowesco, Sharon Wilson, Atalia Johnson, Dame Ivy Dumont, and of course, notable Hilda Bowen, of course, Elma Garraway. All of these women set the foundation for us to be where we are today, women. So today I stand in this honorable Senate to salute all women of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, all of the female senators in this house as well. I pay honor to you today because we have come a mighty, mighty long way. I encourage all women and men to come out and support and participate in the activities of International Women's Day, which will be celebrated on March 8th, Thursday, March 8, 2018, which will be put on by the Gender Affairs Division of the Department of Social Services. Let us all unite in the true bonds of sisterhood. That is important, women. We have to remember, we may not like each other, we may disagree, and men do that as well, you know, but they just don't do it, I guess, as open as we do. But we have to remember to stand together and stand together in solidarity as women. I found an interesting quote by Margaret Thatcher, and I know you're all going to laugh when you hear this one, which says, in politics, if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. Some of you may disagree, but I strongly support that. And finally, Maya Angelou says it best. Each time a woman stands up for herself, without knowing its possibility, without claiming it, she stands up for all women. So women, let us continue to stand and support each other as we continue to celebrate this day, February 23rd, which is indeed a notable and historical day in Bahamian society. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jasmine Darius.
Madam President, I would also like to celebrate and commemorate the anniversary date that women were first allowed to vote in the Bahamas. February 23rd is the passage of the General Assembly Act. I commend the strong, fierce, fearless, faithful revolutionary women, and of course our suffragists that pioneered and trailblazed for me not only to vote, but also opened the door for women to be elected in Parliament. Every woman, both in the upper and lower house, are beneficiaries of their tremendous contribution. I honor today women of our past and our present, Dame Dr. Joris Johnson, Mabel Walker, Althea Mortimer, Eugenia Lockhart, Mary Ingram, Georgiana Simonet, Alberta Isaacs. And as a young woman in politics, I understand the level of sacrifice, the pressure that comes along with public office. So today, I would also like to honor the current female parliamentarians and revolutionists that are in the House and that have served us. Janet Boswick, Dame Ivy Dumont, Italia Johnson, to name a few, Lynn Holowesco, Dame Marguerite Pentland, and how can I not honor and recognize Bakisha Parker Edgecombe, Lanisha T. Roll, my substantive minister, Chanel Ferguson, Miriam Emanuel, Madam President herself, Kay Forbes Smith, Dr. Mildred Hall Watson, all of the female senators, and to every Bahamian woman from Grand Bahama in the north down to Meguana and Nagua in the south. Today we honor your strength and your internal fortitude, for we are strong women, we build strong families, and we build strong nations.
Amen.
Oh, I'm not. I was just going to thank the senators and ask if there's any other interventions. No, are you? Would you like to make an intervention as well at this time?
I just love jousting with you, Madam President. Madam President, I just rise on behalf of the government side generally to associate myself and our side with those trenchant and historically significant remarks that give recognition to a true milestone in Bahamian history, where, as I said by way of introduction, the Bahamas finally became a modern democracy. It is impossible to have a truly civil society where 1/2 of your population is disenfranchised in any way.
Slightly a little bit more than half.
Yes, slightly a little more than half. Statistically, that's just the way nature has determined it. But I'm speaking metaphorically. And when I say disenfranchised, that also is a metaphor. We know that in 1961, the actual disenfranchisement was done away with as a result of the efforts of the suffragettes and right-thinking Bahamians. But disenfranchisement is more fundamental than simply the right to vote. It's about having due recognition and due empowerment to all of our citizens, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of male or female. And so what I mean by that is I gloried as I came in a young lady who was outside on top of a ladder, and I commend you for the wonderful works of renovation that you're doing, Madam President, but the second time I saw her, she was up there working the palette knife up there, spreading the base before the whole is painted. And she's at the top of a ladder working away, and then she got down and pushed it all together and walked off of the ladder. And I congratulated her. She said, "No, I can't shake your hand, my hand dirty." I said, "My dear, nothing could be dirty about someone such as you who is working so skillfully." And really, this is the point, that there's nothing that men can do now, except the most basic by nature, I suppose. Apart from that women cannot do. No undertaking, no job, no calling. That women are not as good or better than men. I noted that the good Senator Isaacs Dotson referred to Margaret Thatcher. I think that would be the only positive thing that she'd have to say about the Iron Lady, because one of the signal achievements of the Iron Lady was to reduce the union movement in Britain to a mere appendage of its former glory. And so, that's like the devil quoting scripture. Or scripture quoting the devil, I don't know. So there's only one other point I think that I'd like to correct, just for the record. Yes, it is true that my learned and highly respected predecessor, Alison Maynard Gibson, was the first female Bahamian in the Bahamas to be a QC. There is a female Bahamian who was awarded the Queen's Counsel, and that is the daughter of former Justice of the Supreme Court, Emmanuel Osadebe. His daughter, and his Bahamian wife, and his daughter was I think Attorney General in Belize, and received the Queen's Counsel award, if you will, or recognition in Belize first. She's the first Bahamian anywhere. But certainly in terms of our legal system and the recognition by our legal system of excellence in an attorney and a female, Alison Maynard Gibson was the first one here to receive that recognition by our legal system, just for the record. And so, Madam President, let me say that we all glory in all that women have done, and I would like to point to someone in this chamber who herself was a pace setter, who was in that glorious class of 1992. And 1992 when you got in? 97, eh? 97? Well, okay, you were in the glorious second wave of 1997, and that is Senator Wanian Dorset, better known to us all as Jay, who represented that great constituency of Fox Hill, and that ain't no easy task, with grace and dignity. She's a proud daughter of one of the foremost traditional communities in this country, Fox Hill. We speak about Emancipation Day, we speak about Fox Hill, and she's a descendant of that great ramming clan. So when y'all hear about Don't Mind Livingston, Josiah, is the JP? Okay, that's Josiah Ramming, the great Josiah Ramming. I believe it's your grandfather. Exactly. And so I wanted to commend Jay Dorset for her service, having stepped forward when even then it was not the norm for women to come forward and get into that front line. Way back in 1997, she went to a very difficult seat, a historically PLP seat. That's the fact. And she won it. And she served well. And I want to thank her for her service and her continuing service as well. So on those notes, Madam President, I associate myself and our side with all the positive remarks that have been made as we seek to make a better civil and equal society in the Bahamas for all Bahamians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Chair now recognizes
Thank you so much, Madam President.
Senator the Honorable Dr. Darville.
Thank you so much, Madam President. I too would like to join Senator Joe Beth, the leader on the side opposite, in celebrating the anniversary of the passing of the General Assembly, which allowed women throughout this country to be a part of the democratic process. There are thousands of unknown stories of women who played pivotal role in the lead up to the ability for women to take their true place in our society. I can think about all of the dynamic women who are in the healthcare system who make a positive contribution daily to the growth and development as well as the health of our community. And sitting to the left of me is Senator Senator Mildred Watson. Yeah, she's right here on the side of me. And Hall Watson, that's right, who was still making a positive contribution to the well-being and care of women throughout this country. I would also like to say that in the technical and vocational areas, we have watched women excel in areas that were predominantly controlled by male. And it goes to show that despite we have a long way to go, we are making great strides in women taking their true place in our society. I am pleased to be a part of this process as women celebrate this day. On behalf of all of us on the side office, we congratulate women throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all senators. Sometime as the president, as you know, my job is to preside over these meetings, but I will have much more to say on the February 23rd date, the significance of it, as well as International Women's Day on March 8th, and also the group of women who will be traveling to the 62nd session of the UN on the Commission and Status of Women coming up towards the end of March. And you will hear my voice in another media. But I want to thank all of you for your comments, all senators, because as the leader of our government business did indicate, women represent a little bit more than half the population around the world. And certainly it's still a struggle for all of us. but we look forward to better days, particularly in the Bahamas. I would like to now proceed with the order of business. Great. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign,
None.
swearing in of new senators,
None.
communications by the President, messages from the Governor General,
None.
messages from the House of Assembly,
None.
laying of documents by ministers,
None.
communications by ministers,
None.
communications by senators,
None.
questions,
None.
answers to questions,
None.
presentations of petitions,
None.
appointment of select committees,
None.
reports of committees,
None.
first reading of bills,
None.
second reading and committal of bills.
Thank you, Madam President. Does the chair recognize him?
I'm sorry. The chair does recognize Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel.
Thank you. This is just an ongoing
Thank you
joust.
for recognizing that you need to be recognized.
And thank you for recognizing me, having made that recognition. May I use? Thank you. Thank you, sir. Madam President, I beg leave to move for the second reading and committal of the credit reporting bill, which is more particularly a bill for an act to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the financial system in order to assure objective credit decisions, to enable credit information sharing and reporting, to provide for the regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services, to provide safeguards for data protection for customers of credit providers, and for connected matters. Madam President, no doubt on a bill as important as this and as technical, we could stand here and focus upon the minutiae or the minute details in the bill, but that would be to miss the point. This debate is about principle. We're speaking about whether we as a people have the courage to squarely face and honestly acknowledge the mistakes of the past, and having done so, to correct those mistakes going forward. This bill is a product of the efforts of several governments. Our government today, the former government, the Ingram administration before that. But notwithstanding that there is great bipartisan support for the purity of the objectives that are being sought by this bill, as I'll explain, we do know that there will be persons outside, and you say, if you move, you get criticized. If you don't, you do get criticized. Who will find some grounds to try and perhaps complain, to proclaim that somehow the Credit Reporting Act will drive the poor away from the banks, prevent the poor from being able to borrow money, adversely affect the economic growth of the country by constricting access to credit. And since most of the spending in our economy, which spending generates tax revenue, is based on the ability to borrow, and our taxation system is dependent on consumer spending, whether it's through the collection of customs or excise taxes at the border, or through the payment domestically of value-added tax on goods and services. Some will complain that the Credit Reporting Act will necessarily lead to lower taxation, lower tax revenues, and then the need for the government to borrow even more money and increase the national indebtedness. That's a hymn sheet that I'm sure any pundit on the internet, on talk radio, can sing from. However, in assessing the credit market and where we are today, and what this bill seeks to achieve, not only to ensure stability in our banking system and in our credit market, but also to provide consumer protection, to protect people against the improper disclosure of their personal information, to protect people against false information, and to give people redress and a method to challenge false or improperly disclosed confidential and personal information. Despite that, we have to deal with the issues. We have to deal with the arguments that could raise their head. But in doing so, we have to look at the realities which confront us today. And the realities are not pretty. And this bill is a part of an effort, a holistic effort, to address difficulties in our national and corporate governance, and to restore confidence in the Bahamian economy, and in particular, in this instance, in the engine of that economy, which is the banking system. The fact is, Madam President, that after the 2008 economic recession, bank lending to consumers has, over that period, gone on a downward trajectory and has fallen markedly. The losses in the mortgage market particularly has contributed now to major restructuring in the several banks, mostly in terms of cutting employment, and adding to that loss of works is the move now towards the creation of digital banking platforms, using automated machines to replace human beings, all in the interest of making a few coppers more. People are being replaced by machines simply for the banks to make a few dollars more. The reality is that post-2008, when we had the world's, what they call the Great Recession, banks have institutionally gone further. They have increased their lending thresholds, making it more difficult for consumers to qualify, particularly for persons to qualify for business loans, increasing the collateral requirements and the collateral securities, increasing the ratios of money in the bank to money being borrowed, and all sorts of ways to make it more difficult. The 2016 Central Bank Report at page 39 makes it clear that in 2017, private sector, the 2016 report comes out in 2017, okay? The private sector credit contracted in 2016, the year before, by over $129 million, or by 2%. And that 2% reduction in lending to the private sector added to the 68 million contraction the year before, or 1.1%. So over the last 2 years prior to 2017, in 2015 and 2016, there was roughly a 3.1% contraction in the amount of money being loaned to the private sector. And actually, when we look at the more historic figures, we'd see that there's even more. Personal loans, which is the dominant form of private sector lending, and it comprised 79.8, so 80% of all private sector lending is personal loans. And then you have business and miscellaneous loans making up the balance. Well, personal loans declined by 58 million, nearly 59 million, 58.8 million in 2016. Miscellaneous loans fell by 55.9 million. Professional services loans, maybe to professionals like lawyers, etc., fell by 8 million. Loans to manufacturing sector fell by 4.6 million. Entertainment and catering business loans to restaurants, etc., fell by 4.3 million. Home mortgages fell by $126.9 million, or 5.2% contraction in 2016, reflecting the continued distressed state of the mortgage market. Now, consumer credit, being largely comprised of small, occasional loans, home improvement loans, educational loans, and credit cards, and so forth, that accelerated by 90 million. But that 90 million doesn't make up for the $126 million lost in the mortgage market supporting homes for families. The loss of 129 million on top of that in private sector loans. So, you know, yes, you got little small incidental loans for some consumers, but by and by, the loss of financial contribution by the banks to national development through loans to businesses, loans for mortgages, has catastrophically fallen. And the lending picture for the average resident continues to look very bleak, which brings us to where we are. The central bank's quarterly bank lending conditions survey report for 2016 states, and I quote, "Data on private sector credit for the first quarter of 2016 showed the volume and value of new credit extended by commercial banks remained largely dependent on the credit worthiness of applicants, as evidenced by the quality of their collateral, their debt service ratios, and credit history." These things I spoke about, that banks are now requiring better quality or higher quality or more collateral security. That would be some land or some other item of property to provide additional security to the loan, let's say for a mortgage. The first security, of course, being the mortgaged premises and land. They're also looking, as I said, at what you have in the bank to determine your debt service ratio, to determine whether as a percentage of your income and or your savings or both, whether the amount you're borrowing is too high. If it goes above a certain threshold, even though you are liquid, even though you have the money, even though the amount you're bringing in can support the proposed borrowing, you probably still won't get the loan because your debt service ratio is too high, and they're saying, well, what you have out there may impact what you could pay here, and we're not going to lend you this money. And of course, the banks are already, according to the central bank, looking at credit history. Now, we would think that that would only mean credit history in their own institutions, but we're not sure that that is so. There are only 8 banks, 4 non-Bahamian, 7 banks, I think, that are operative. They can chat with each other anyway. You don't know what information they are exchanging. But we know this much, that consumer credit has overall been on a downward trajectory. And this is confirmed by the central bank's quarterly statistic digest for November of 2017, last year. In 2013, the total consumer credit, and this is important for us to realize when we benchmark against the earlier finding in the central bank's quarterly, 2016 report, where they found that consumer credit in 2016 was only 90.2 million. Let's look at what the final outturns were. In 2017, total consumer credit was $360 million. In 2014, it had dropped to 354 million. By 2016, end of the year, consumer credit, total consumer credit had fallen to 137 million. That's more than a $200 million reduction per annum in consumer lending between 2016 and 2013. And by September of 2017, total consumer credit was only $122 million. So it's very clear, if you just look between 2013 and the outturns of last year of 137 million, the year before, 2016, 137 million. There's more than $200 million reduction in the amount of available credit being placed into the market, into the Bahamas by the commercial banks. So we, and I think successive governments, recognized that we have to do what has to be done to restore confidence and certainty in the domestic commercial banking system. We have to restore the confidence in the banks in consumers, that banks would feel a greater sense of security in lending to consumers, and that the only way that this can be happily effected is to move forward with this bill, which has been worked on now by 3 governments in succession, all with the same aim of restoring not only consumer confidence, but bankers' confidence in lending, to reverse the negative trend, because it is true that a significant portion, perhaps too much dependence, exists in terms of the fiscal arrangements of the Bahamas. Too much is dependent on consumer spending. But then, not only for the government, the malls, the mom and pop shops, the grocery stores, the major supermarkets, all depend on the availability of credit. The availability of credit means that, you know, you can free up more of your income sometimes just to buy the basics. And so we are intent that and satisfied that by passing this bill, we will have a dynamic impact in stimulating a re-engagement by our commercial banks with our consuming public. Those who have served as ministers in both governments, who sit on both sides of this table in this House, are also aware of the struggle, now more than a decade old, of the public service and the public treasury, Madam President, to help public servants to better help themselves by bringing in, over time, a restriction on the amount of deductions that can be taken out of public service salaries. The goal being to reach a level where no more than 60% of someone's monthly salary can be paid on deductions. But it has taken more than a decade, because when this initiative started, I well remember a lady telling me that showing me that out of her paycheck, showed me her pay slip where she got $9 back at the end of the month after all of her deductions. $9. So it has long been recognized that at an administrative level, that prudential life management and prudential borrowing habits must be encouraged from the highest levels, even in our public service, so as to relieve the burdens which people who previously, having not been guided, having not been counseled, have so often hampered themselves with. It probably will take another decade to get everybody under the 60%, but it's a work in progress. because it is not merely a question of imposing a limit by edict. It's about empowering people to make better lifestyle and borrowing decisions, giving them and equipping them with the skills, the knowledge, and the ability to say no to the immediate gratification of something with borrowed money, and to have a more prudential way of organizing their personal finances. So while the government is seeking at that level to do this, banks have similarly tightened up their practices in lending. And although there is no credit reporting bureau at the present time until this law passes, it must be obvious to all that the commercial banks are not only tightening up their internal controls and due diligence, but I'm sure that they're getting some kind of information from others. What you know about so-and-so, just casually, just, you know, confidentially exchanging, just a casual call. And the problem with this is that it may be effective for their purposes, but it provides no possibility of even knowledge by the consumer or any relief if the information is incorrect. If they got some name wrong or part of the name wrong, you know, they had about 3 Carl Bettles. Which Carl Bettel you talking about? Well, I'll probably be the one, actually. But, you know, John Roll, oh my heavens. You know, which John Roll you think you talking about? Or James Smith, yeah, exactly. So there's a clear need to establish a platform that is independent, has the integrity to perform its work, will protect its information, and will provide a means by somebody who may either have been unfairly or incorrectly prejudiced by some report or some information that is shared, gives them a remedy to challenge it, correct the record, and clear their name. That is what this bill is seeking to do, to establish a legal method to provide verifiable and a lawful method to obtain credit references in relation to prospective borrowers. The intent is to avoid any informal information exchanges and to provide a system that has checks and balances to actually protect consumers, and to provide remedies where banks may have received false or misleading information or simply incorrect information, which has negatively affected the ability of the consumer, the average borrower, the average business person, the average mom and pop store, to obtain a personal, an educational, or a business loan. Consumer lending, private sector lending. The intent is to actually strengthen the banking system, provide greater certainty to banks, greater protection to the borrower or applicant who may be refused a loan, and to cause a reversal in the noted declines in the amounts of consumer and business and personal loans, so that our economy can receive the appropriate support for economic growth that will be provided by a healthy borrowing regime. Borrowing within the means of the consumer to repay, and thereby our whole nation can receive the benefits of a healthier banking system. This bill is not the creation of the FNM government, although we had a hand in it, and we're bringing it forward. It is ours. We take responsibility for it. We think it's in the best interest of the people. It was drafted under the last administration and the administration before that. But when you move it, you own it. We own it. We met it on the table. We've laid it on this table. And we are intent because we think it reflects the best intentions of all governments, including the last one, to effect real and meaningful reforms to protect consumers and to enhance the delivery of consumer credit while strengthening the domestic banking system. A few quick provisions of the bill and then I'll be finished, just so people could understand the scenario. This credit reporting system will not be administered by any minister or any ministry. It will be administered by the Central Bank of the Bahamas. And if there ever were a fortress of confidentiality and secrecy, it's that temple right there on Market Street. They call this the Federal Reserve in the U.S., the temple. We got our temple too. And the mandarins keep their secrets close to their chest. The central bank, a revered, honored, time-tested institution in this country, and highly respected, will administer the system. It will grant licenses to the Credit Bureau or any other credit bureaus. It will set the standards of conduct. It will issue directions to any credit bureau or any credit information provider, meaning banks, and I'll come to who they are, but basically banks, or to any user of the system. It will ensure the credit bureaus maintain proper standards of conduct and acceptable practices. It will protect the integrity of the credit reporting system against any abuse and will take measures to protect the interests of consumers. Somewhat brutally or maybe surgically referred to as data subjects. The bill is rather clinical. It's a very technical bill, and I apologize that it doesn't use the politic terms that I would love to see in such a bill, consumers, but it uses precise legal terminology for an important reason. When it speaks about a data subject, it is speaking about the human being, about whom information is in some bank's books, or that has been reported by some bank or some other entity to a credit reporting bureau. It speaks about the human being, but it does so in precise legal terminology, so it is clear exactly who that human being is when it's time to enforce his or her rights in the event of abuse. Now, no person is able to carry on the business of a credit bureau without a license from the central bank, and it must be a limited company for prudential reasons. The central bank may grant a license after an application subject to such terms as the central bank thinks fit. In other words, no one's going to be dictating to the central bank what kind of license they get. The central bank is going to deal with it. Now, this is very important. Let me explain what the bill allows or envisages could happen. The bill envisages that persons with this sort of knowledge, maybe the experience working in credit bureaus elsewhere, Bahamians, could come home, set up a company, and set up their own credit reporting company, apply to the central bank, bring all the skills, the wealth, the knowledge, the know-how that they would have gained abroad, and bring that to the table, create some new jobs for more people, apply for a license, get a license, and perform those functions. But it also admits of the possibility that those who would have the greater interest financially in an accurate and reliable credit bureau system may wish to participate in forming such an entity. But the bill is intent on making sure that the banks, though they may contribute to the Credit Reporting Bureau, will not be in charge. Any credit reporting institution, or credit information provider, who may wish to have an equity position, or any group of such, may not. So if all the commercial banks decided they wanted to set up their own credit company, this is in Section 9, subsection 5. They are limited to no more than a 49% share. And any individual bank who wants to invest in either a collaborative group effort by all the banks to set up a cartel credit reporting bureau, they can only own 49%, less than half. And among their members, no single bank can own more than 5% of the shares in that entity. So clearly the intent of this legislation is to prevent precisely a cartel of banks setting up some wholly owned proxy to store collectively the banking information of all of their clients to determine in a group, in this bureau, who shall get a loan and who cannot, based on its standards. Amen. They will not own either singly or as a group more than 49% of the shares, which means that out of 51% of the shares have to be owned by the same people who go into them for loans will be the investors in the other 51% of the shares. So they will have as much or more of an interest in seeing the proper running of an independent credit bureau that is uninfluenced by commercial interests and that properly balances not only the commercial interests of the banks, but the personal and human rights interests of ordinary Bahamians and the business communities, because it will be business persons who will be making up the 51% of the shares in this credit reporting bureau. The central bank, if they misbehave, may suspend or cancel any license of a credit bureau. Pardon me? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Great minds think alike, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Now, who are these credit information providers contemplated by the Act? Section 18 clearly states who they are. It's a licensed bank under the Banks and Trust Companies Act, Regulations Act. It is a person licensed under the Insurance Act, see, because insurance companies, let me talk Bahamian, does lend money too on mortgages. And so they have an interest in the mortgage market and also in what they call the secondary securities aspect, where one mortgage company might bundle up their stuff and sell it to another insurance company to back up their risk, if you will. So all of these are in the market for commercial paper, naming mortgages. And they all have information which could well be necessary in forming a proper view of someone's creditworthiness. Also, any person licensed pursuant to the Financial and Corporate Services Providers Act, a credit union, because a lot of lending, particularly for persons in public service, teachers and public service workers, but also major hotel employees as well. There are cooperative credit unions for which a lot of borrowing goes on, so they can be a credit information provider, the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation and the Bahamas Development Bank. Those are the only entities entitled to inform the credit reporting, the credit bureau, about anything to do about anybody's credit history or performance. So, sip, sip, and you say, I say, none of that counts for a hill of beans and cannot be reported to anyone. The only persons are those entities that I've listed who are entitled to make any kind of report to the Credit Bureau. Now, the human being who is the subject of a credit report is entitled to know, under Section 24, entitled to know what information was submitted to the Credit Bureau by a credit information provider. Human beings are entitled to access data, subject information related to the subject kept, maintained, or processed by the Bureau. Human being is entitled to obtain annually a copy of his or her credit report without costs. So any Bahamian who wants to know how or what rating has been applied to them by this credit bureau under Section 24C is entitled once a year to obtain a copy of their credit assessment free of charge from the credit bureau. See, it's about certainty, you know, and rights of access. And if you have my information, I have a right to know what you have, what its source is. Now, when a person is applying for a loan, naturally, the bank would want to have some view of their credit history. Well, they can't get it under 25 unless they, in bold letters, make it very clear to that person that they're signing a document authorizing the bank to obtain their credit rating information from the credit bureau. It must be specifically drawn to the attention of the consumer in bold writing. Let's see what it says. Except with the consent of the consumer. I don't like the word a data subject. I'm sorry, I'm not quite so computerized in my head just to be able to conversationally refer to a human being as a data subject. So, except for the consent of the person, a subscriber, meaning the bank, shall not request or obtain a credit report for permissible purpose in respect of that person. The credit bureau must not release that information unless satisfied that the person has signed a consent. And in Section 25(3)(b), they must prominently display information regarding the consent in a clear and comprehensible manner in an application for credit, insurance, employment, or tenancy, meaning applying for a lease. Anybody who wants to go to the credit bureau to find out about John A. to Z. Smith, so now we know who he is, must show a document that very clearly indicates to him, the signer, the individual, that he is agreeing for his information to be disclosed to that person. Okay? And where a person has applied for a loan to a credit provider and having obtained the information, declines the loan under Section 26, the credit provider must notify the individual of the denial of the credit, and without cost to the person, that person is able to request a copy of the credit report from the credit bureau upon which the bank may have made its determination. Now here's another important point. You know, under the present law, like some non-expungible criminal offenses, which cannot be expunged under the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, bad debt could follow you to the grave and beyond. This act puts an end to that. Under Section 27, a 5-year limitation period is imposed, so that after the date of the termination or settlement of that credit, no further reference or information on that unfortunate thing can be disclosed by the credit bureau after 5 years. But it must be the termination or settlement. Now, termination will occur in one of two ways. The bank may write off the loan or the default, or you may settle it, either in whole or in part, in a manner acceptable to the institution. So the institution may write off a part of the debt. That's why the word termination or settlement. They may accept payment of 70% of the outstanding debt and forgive 30. Well, 5 years after that date, that information will no longer affect, under this law, a person's credit rating because they've settled the matter. It may not have been perfect settlement, but the law anticipates if a bank or an institution has given you absolution and forgiveness of sin, whether in part or in whole, you should not be haunted by that to the doors of death, but have relief after 5 years where it will no longer affect your credit rating. And anyone who lie on anybody else in this matter, under Section 28, is guilty of a criminal offense and will be dealt with accordingly. This whole act will be supervised in Part 5 by the Central Bank of the Act, in Part 5 of the Act. And if anybody is aggrieved by, and this is about providing remedy, if a credit report that someone receives, goes and gets, has, I don't know about this loan, I don't know about this loan, and they make a complaint, and the complaint is either not dealt with in time or refused, and they have a grievance, they can appeal to a new body that will be created called the Credit Reporting Review Commission. And that commission will be I think it's a five-person commission. Let me get it right. No, 3-person commission, which in the schedule of the Act is comprised of the Data Protection Commissioner, who is the chairperson. That's Mr. Wright right now. There's the chairman of the Consumer Protection Commission. My learned friend to my right will let us know who that person is. Mr. Benaby. And one person...
Philip Benaby.
I know. Philip Benaby. Okay. Okay. Yes, Mr. Philip Benaby is the chairman of the...
Consumer Protection.
Yes, that is right. And there's one person appointed by the minister, and that would be, I believe, the Minister of Finance. Let me double check that because I could be wrong there. Let me check it. Minister with responsibility for finance. Minister of Finance, on the recommendation of the Data Protection Commissioner, from amongst persons who have wide experience and qualifications in legal, administrative, economic, and financial matters. So the consumer who is upset with any ruling or lack of a ruling by the Credit Bureau on their complaint can appeal to the Credit Reporting Review Commission, and if they are further aggrieved, they can go to the Supreme Court, and if further aggrieved, go to the Court of Appeal, but sometimes you have to take no for an answer. And it might be better to accept the second no from the Review Commission. Madam President, so what we have here is, we believe, a framework for greater certainty for lenders and borrowers, a framework to prevent the to protect the confidentiality of private information, and to provide a means whereby either lies, untruths, mistakes, errors can be caught by way of going to the Bureau or going to the Review Commission or higher up through the Supreme Court and Court of Appeal, so that the consumer has clear pathways to relief. And on those notes, Madam President, I commend this bill to colleague senators and the Bahamian people. And I beg leave, once again, if I may obtain a seconder, to move that the credit reporting bill be read a second time and committed. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Renard Henfield.
Madam President and honorable senators, greet you a good morning. Madam President, before I begin to address the credit reporting bill, I wish to associate myself with the remarks from my female colleagues this morning on this notable anniversary of getting things right for our women. Apparently, I was the only man in here that agreed with Senator Dotson Isaacs when she quoted that if you want something said, ask a man, and if you want something done, ask a woman. And I will repeat publicly for the hearing of the nation, I agree with that. And my wife was listening. I agree with that. But I wish to extend my gratitude and thanks to each of these esteemed national heroes mentioned earlier, and I'm excited for the future of my two daughters and my niece. Madam President, I rise today to, first of all, thank God for the opportunity once again to stand up and speak up. And today I speak to a bill for an act to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the financial system. Madam President, allow me to preface my contribution today on this bill by sharing my professional experience over the last decade. In the last 12 years, Madam President, I have practiced as a banking lawyer. And in my practice, I have overseen thousands of court actions in the Magistrate Supreme Court all the way up to the Court of Appeal with respect to defaults and breaches on credit facilities. And Madam President, one of the things that has stood out to me over the last 12 years in my profession is that some days I'm taking someone to court for a default on a credit facility with respect to Bank A, who I've also taken to court for their default on that another credit facility with Bank B, C, D, and Bank E. In those last 12 years, Madam President, I have practiced as the debt collection attorney for Fidelity Bank, Commonwealth Bank, Scotia Bank, Royal Bank, Sunshine Finance, and First Caribbean. And for years representing 5 of these lending institutions at the very same time. So I've seen where I've had to take one person to court for 5 different banks within a 5-year period. And Madam President, many of these persons have found themselves in default as a result of the recession, thus at no fault of their own. The banks, Madam President, have slowed their lending over the years to what appears to be a drip from the faucet. But while they have slowed their lending, our people still need to send our kids to college. Our people still need to launch businesses or expand already existing businesses. And while the banks have slowed their lending to a near drip from the tap in recent years, our people still have hopes of becoming first-time homeowners. On top of that, Madam President, you have persons who are trying to move from one bank to another bank to lower their interest rates. But how does the government of the day assist our people and our banks at this time? And that's what this bill is about for me, Madam President. How does the government assist our people and the banks at this time? And Madam President, I've titled my contribution today, Let's Give Credit Where Credit is Due. Let's give credit where credit is due. Something I wish to urge banks to do, to give credit where credit is due. And Madam President, I want for a moment just to ask that you imagine John Bain, who's had 5 loans over the last 15 years, who's paid off every loan in the last 15 years, but now walks into a bank on Bay Street to be told in 2018, I am sorry, we are not lending at this time. And Mr. Bain has to then go home to his daughter and dash her dreams and hopes of going off to college this September to become a Bahamian scientist someday. Because the default of a small portion of our population has to be borne by the masses in this country, as banks do not have that comfort in lending anymore. In truth, the bank wasn't concerned, Madam President, with the color of John Bain's skin, his religious views, his political affiliation, or his surname. The bank's non-performing loan portfolio is just too high. Persons are losing their jobs just too often in the Bahamas, and the risk is just too great for the banks to lend our people. You see, Madam President, again, the delinquency of a few is being borne by the masses. Some persons have been acquiring significant loans and defaulting on these loans like it's nobody's business. The government has even been using taxpayers' dollars to offset these debts for quite some time. People who honor their obligations, Madam President, and this is a reality check, our people who have been honoring their obligations have been punished because of the people who have abused the banking system. I say again, Madam President, I wish for those listening in the banking system to hear that we must give credit where credit is due. What we all hope for today, Madam President, as we debate this credit reporting bill, for the sake of our people, the homeowners, the business owners, and those students who are hopeful that they will go off to college sometime this year or next year, what we hope for by debating this bill, and what we hope to accomplish, Madam President, is that the introduction of this credit bureau will restart bank lending. We also hope that it will cause our people to honor their financial obligations and pay attention to their credit worthiness. It gives the bank, Madam President, the ability to make more informed decisions on a customer's credit worthiness and encourage them to lend to those to whom credit is due. It also gives our people, Madam President, the opportunity to have a nationally recognized and legal entity vouch for their credit worthiness when they seek credit facilities. Madam President, if I may digress just for a moment, in preparing my presentation for today, I had cause to review Jamaica's credit bureau and Trinidad's credit bureau. And what we all in here know, or may know, and now know, is that Jamaica has a credit bureau. But what we have not paid attention to, Madam President, is that according to the World Bank's 2018 ranking for doing business, Jamaica sits at rank number 20 out of 190 countries for getting credit. Jamaica sits at number 20 on the World Bank's ranking for getting credit. The Bahamas, not to be outdone, stands at an astounding, unbelievable, and mind-boggling rank of 142 out of 190 countries. And what we may not know, Madam President, is back in 2014, Jamaica was ranked at about 85th on the World Bank's ranking for doing business. And by 2015, due to their credit bureau, jumped to 58. The Bahamas stands currently ranked at 119. Jamaica also ranks, Madam President, at an astounding number 5 for starting a business. And I spoke earlier, Madam President, about persons, our people, Bahamians, going to banks and seeking loans to start businesses or to expand their businesses. And you have a lot of Bahamians with wonderful ideas, but can't launch these initiatives because the banks are not lending. And the Bahamas stands at number 142. So again, while we may not like to hear about Jamaica's strides and the benefits of their credit bureau, who now stands at rank number 20, we have to give credit where credit is due. So for those persons in our country who are saying we don't need a credit bureau, I wish to stand here today in seconding this motion and say we clearly need a credit bureau. Madam President, I also wish to give credit where credit is due to the central bank and the Minister of Finance, and by extension, this administration. You see, the central bank started this process some 7 years ago. Under a previous F&M government and continued under the PLP government, and here we are now in 2018. And 7 years, Central Bank has been pushing this issue, and I wish to give them their credit where credit is due. And Madam President, truth is, there will be some people that will get the bad end of the stick. You see, thousands of people have lost their jobs due to the recession and no fault of their own, especially my people and our people in Grand Bahama. And there's going to be a day, Madam President, when they're going to wake up and there's going to be a credit bureau. And their credit rating, unfortunately, is going to be bad because they're unemployed and they're not in a position to service their loans. So when that credit report is produced, that credit report isn't going to state John Doe or Jasmine Darius in Grand Bahama hasn't paid her mortgage in 1 year. But it's not going to mention because some foreign investor left Grand Bahama and left hundreds of our people unemployed. So there are going to be some people, Madam President, that will get the bad end of the stick. But nonetheless, we must not lose focus and miss the point of this bill and this credit bureau that is intended to jumpstart or kickstart lending in this country, and which we hope as legislators will remind our people to honor their credit obligations. Madam President, I wish to speak to the issue of the bill that I saw in my review that says the Credit Bureau may release a list of good paying data subjects. And while I support the bill, I think that is an issue that needs to be revisited. You see, Madam President, as an attorney, and for those of us who are here, we all would know that a few years ago, the Bar Association tried something similar, where we're all to get a certificate of good standing every year after paying our annual dues. And they sought to release a list of those attorneys who were in good standing. But in effect, what that was doing was placing a negative perception on lawyers who may not have paid that fee for their good standing certificate, or due to record keeping whose name did not appear on that list of lawyers in good standing. So I wish, Madam President, to draw that to the government's attention. And while we know as lawyers and legislators that every bill is a living creature or act that can be amended someday, that is something I think we should revisit. I don't think in any circumstance the Credit Bureau should be able to list and say, these are the 5,000 people in the country who pay their bills on time. I don't think that is something that we should do. And I remember a wise man once said, be careful in what you legislate. Make sure you legislate something that you can live with when you are no longer in this place. So I wish to draw that to the government's attention, Madam President. But we must also appreciate, Madam President, that, and for me as a banking lawyer having practiced in this area for the last 12 years, that banks are subject to a statute of limitation that says you have 6 years to bring an action for default on a credit facility. And when this Credit Bureau comes into place, Madam President, and John Doe or John Bain, 6 years, has not made a payment on a credit facility, legally, the bank can't recover that debt. They bring an action to call dismiss that because your last payment was over 6 years ago. But with this Credit Bureau, that credit information provider, whichever bank, can provide that information that John Doe had a loan with me from 2006 that he hasn't paid in 6 years. So he gets a negative rating, Madam President. And while I hear the leader of government business say today that the bank will then have 5 years afterwards to provide that information, actually from the 6-year mark of non-payment, the bank can't recover that. So I think that's something we must consider as well moving forward, Madam President. There's also a portion of the legislation, Madam President, that speaks to the credit information provider can provide information relative to judgments to the Credit Bureau, but must put in writing that this debt is still outstanding. And again, from my experience in the last 12 years and overseeing over 10,000 matters in the courts, Madam President, that can be problematic. You see, Madam President, as my learned colleagues present who are attorneys would know, when you go to court, sometimes the court says to an individual defendant, make payments into court, make payments to the collection agency, make payments to the law firm, make payments to the bank. So when we rely on simply the credit information provider, aka the bank, to say we haven't been paid, a lot of the banks employ debt collection agencies who will be collecting funds for quite some time before they turn them over to the bank. So, Madam President, that is something, again, I say we should pay some attention to over the next few years when we speak to a bill for an act to provide a fair and accurate credit reporting system. 12 years. I've seen persons come to court picked up on warrants for non-payment to stand before a judge to only explain to the judge, I paid this debt off 3 years ago to the debt collection agency or into the court and I have a receipt. And that credit information provider, the bank, is then saying, well, we would need to check with them to see if they received the funds and just hasn't forwarded on to us. How do we prevent that negative credit rating, Madam President, when things like this happen? And I speak again today from a perspective of someone who's been doing this for 12 years, Madam President. These are things I see happening on a regular basis. Madam President, I move now to what I see as an elephant in the room, and an issue I've been advocating on for the last year. When we speak to a Credit Information Bureau, I think we must also speak to educating our people on money management. We cannot come, Madam President, just say, here's a bill that will give the banks more confidence in lending and encourage you to honor your credit obligations when we have not taught our people money management skills from the primary school, the high school. And I would like to urge this administration to consider implementing a class, a course, a subject on money management for our people. Otherwise, the problem we have today will continue. The only difference is we will have a credit reporting bureau with people who don't know how to manage their finances, Madam President. Madam President, I move now to the issue of civil liability and gross negligence under Section 37 of this bill, which speaks to liability to a data subject, which is the consumer or the individual or person. In law, gross negligence is a conscious and voluntary disregard of the need to use reasonable care, which is likely to cause foreseeable grave injury or harm to persons, property, or both. And it is conduct that is extreme when compared with ordinary negligence, Madam President, which is a mere failure to exercise reasonable care. And I say when we want to speak to having a fair and accurate credit reporting system, I think gross negligence is a very high standard to tell our people that if a false or inaccurate report is put out there on you, it has to be gross negligence. See, the international standard is a credit bureau is responsible for the information it puts out there about a data subject or a consumer. And it's not a matter of gross negligence, it's any negligence. So while, again, I commend the central bank for its 7 years on this bill, I commend the previous two administrations, and I commend this administration and Minister of Finance for the political will to bring this bill, pass this bill. There are some concerns. The leader of government business spoke earlier, Madam President. I welcomed his comments, and it answered so many questions I intended to present today on behalf of civil society organizations who had reached out to me. He answered so many of the concerns, Madam President, one of them being we want to see that credit bureaus are being independent. And then the bill speaks, Madam President, to credit information providers owning shares in the credit bureau. And when we speak to independence of a credit bureau, and I can now see the bank who's providing information to the credit bureau owning shares in the credit bureau. 49% shares may be the minority of 100% shares, but someone with 49% ownership of a company can still be the majority shareholder in that company. And I see judge, jury, and executioner. You see, because I can't go and borrow $1 million from Royal Bank, Madam President, find myself in default, and then find out that Royal Bank is providing that credit information to the credit bureau, but also owns 49% in the credit bureau, who's then producing a report to advise other banks, don't lend him money because he has defaulted, or he isn't paying consistently. Which bank is going to lend me money to pay off that bank in that situation, Madam President? So there's so much things that we must consider over the next year or two. Great job done on the bill, Madam President. I say again, I give credit where credit is due. But I think as we debate, our role here is to make sure that the best legislation at the time can be put forward. So there will be times, as we all know in the profession of law and as legislators, that it's a living thing. We can make amendments as we go. It's a bill that is needed, Madam President. I welcome the bill and trust that those persons listening and learning more about how this bill will operate and how it will affect their lives are paying attention, also doing their own research. And Madam President, again, I say I am adamant that the banks ought to give credit where credit is due. If you have an individual who is paying, he ought not be penalized because other people in our country don't pay. Let us give credit where credit is due. And Madam President, our role here today as legislators is to strengthen the stability of the financial sector and hope it jumpstarts lending. But Madam President, our people must be more cognizant of the impact their non-payment on credit facilities has on their ability to obtain credit in the future. And they must also be cognizant, Madam President, of the impact their delinquency has on our economy and other persons in need of credit to launch businesses, to purchase their first homes, and to send their kids off to college. And our government must address that elephant in the room and introduce money management courses, whether it's in our primary and high schools or even early in our preschools. And I wish to end, Madam President, giving credit where credit is due. One of my pastors said the other day in a video I watched that God never made one table or chair. God never made one table or chair, yet here we are sitting down to tables and chairs. And what he said is that God gives us opportunity. Everything we need, God presents us the opportunity. So I give God thanks for this opportunity again, Madam President, and I give God the credit for the opportunity to stand up and speak up. And I take this chamber back to when I was first sworn in as a consultative senator. And Madam President will recall, I reached out to Madam President, who didn't even know my name at the time. And I said, Madam President, I don't know how this thing works, but do I need to provide my presentations to you or the leader of the government business to find out it's okay for me to say what I want to say? And I was told, you are a consultative senator. Your role is to speak what concerns you without fear or favor. I reached out to the leader of government business, not letting him know I already asked the president how this thing works. And his words to me was, you are a consultative senator. Your role is to speak up for your civil society issues and organizations. And I give credit again where credit is due. And Madam President, I stand here after giving thanks to God, to yourself, the President, and the leader, and also the Prime Minister for the opportunity. And I am proud to say that I second the bill. Proud to say that I second the bill. It is a much-needed bill to restore consumers' confidence and also confidence in our banks to lend our people as we jumpstart this economy and as we help people fulfill their dreams of home ownership, of further education, Madam President. And that is my contribution, Madam President.
Sorry. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the financial system in order to assure objective credit decisions, to enable credit information sharing and reporting, to provide for the regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services, to provide safeguards for data protection for customers of credit providers and for connected matters. As many,
Just a quick point of information.
excuse me, the
correction,
chair
Madam
recognizes Senator the Honorable
I know,
Carl
I was
Bepple.
just saying what I was getting up to do,
Okay,
and then you could.
yes.
Thank you, Madam President.
You already spoke to me. I will allow you before the next speaker to make your short,
Thank you.
short
Very short.
intervention.
Everybody in this place knows I have nothing but the highest regard for Senator Henfield. In fact, that was the reason why I joyously embraced your suggestion that he be appointed whip on this side. And his job is now to whip everybody in line and make sure they toe the line. But notwithstanding that he is a consultation senator, does not take him beyond the realms of being given better information. I note the passion with which he spoke to this issue of beneficial ownership of the credit bureau. That is a concern. The draftspersons in the bill sought to strike a balance because there is a legitimate interest in the banking sector, who we also, as you quite correctly pointed out, are seeking to encourage to re-embrace lending to Bahamians after the catastrophic withdrawal of credit that we have witnessed, that I pointed to in my remarks. And so the balance is that reflective of their interests in having a reliable credit reporting bureau, that they should not be precluded from having some equity participation. The act is clear, though, that any single institution or its beneficial owner, because we know we have one Bahamian bank that clearly has a familial context. And so it obviously was designed to capture where you have a human being having a disproportionate interest in an institution who probably has the wherewithal to get shares themselves. So between that person and that bank, neither of them can own more than 5% of the shares, and that is in Section 9(5)(b) of the Act. Yes, no individual credit information provider, bank, law firm, insurance company, etc., can own more than 5%, either as an institution or by way of their beneficial owner. So if it's a law firm, no law firm or any partner can own more than 5%. And together, any partner in the law firm and the law firm can only own a total of 5% of the shareholding. And in the aggregate, every single law firm, bank, the development bank, any financial and corporate services provider, all of them who are on the lending end, if you will, one way or the other, of the paradigm, cannot own more than 49% as a group. So the cartel can't own more than 49%. 51% will be owned by ordinary persons. And I thought I had to make that very clear. The bill is a balancing act between conflicting interests who have the same interests in freeing up credit, freeing up this economy, and empowering ordinary Bahamians. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable JoBeth Colby Davis.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Senate colleagues, my fellow Bahamians, I rise today to present my contribution to this Credit Reporting Bill 2018. Madam President, let me state outrightly that I do not intend to be before you long, as I am supporting this bill. The Credit Reporting Bill allows for the sharing of credit information between specified financial institutions and enable creditors to make better lending decisions. It also provides for the licensing and supervision of the credit bureau and other connected matters. The legislation will enable creditors to better manage risk and improve pricing of loans once information is accurate and complete. Other benefits include the management of the information by the Credit Bureau, which will facilitate the improvement of credit risk management by financial institutions. So in a nutshell, this is what the credit reporting bill provides for. Eligible credit information providers, type of credit information, uses of credit information, persons who can request a credit report, data security and confidentiality, consumer access to own credit information, consumers' complaints resolution mechanisms, and supervisory oversight by the central bank. Some of the potential benefits of the introduction of the credit reporting for creditors are it allows for a better assessment of the credit worthiness of a borrower. It can also lead to a great decline in non-performing loans, as seen happening now in Jamaica following their implementation, and it may also increase profitability and opportunity to build internal capital. However, Madam President, it is important to note that the implementation of this legislation will indeed create shockwaves throughout the economy for both the banks and the consumers. At first instance, many praise the introduction of a bill that will promote and encourage responsible and more informed lending in the hopes of decreasing consumer debt and poverty. Essentially, the intent is to have responsible borrowing as the new learned behavior in the Bahamas. Theoretically, in the short term, this process will be more beneficial to the banks, as they will now have greater knowledge of the consumer borrowing history and indebtedness and payment behaviors. Therefore, while all would welcome the implementation of the credit reporting bill, I query, did the government consider the adjustment process many will face once this bill is passed? If yes, then I ask, have the government determined ways to assist the consumer? Is there any intended countrywide educational campaign to be had with consumers? Madam President, at all times during my contributions, my immediate concern is the Bahamian people. We can all agree that the present system of borrowing in our country is a highly unregulated environment. Some of our consumers borrow for anything. We have some government workers who immediately after their 6 months probation are unfortunately taking home probably at most 15% of their entire salary. The remainder of their salaries are being deducted by lending and financial institutions to pay off present credit borrowing against their salary as collateral. Also, we can agree that due to some dire situations some may face, persons may be dishonest with the financial institutions, hiding what they presently owe to get access to money without thinking of the consequences of their actions later when it becomes time for repayment. How do the government intend to assist the consumers with credit repair? We speak about how this bill intends to bring about discipline, but if the leaders of the country do not find ways to educate or guide our consumers, then how do we expect them to adopt and become disciplined? See, Madam President, it's one thing to say we are bringing a credit reporting system, which with the overall intent to encourage responsible borrowing. However, the short-term effects would be met with hardship for some, frustration for others, and confusion to new borrowers such as young professionals. Additionally, I query whether we would be able to capture all of the financing institutions by the Credit Bureau. Let me be clear, I am not saying the work of the Bureau would be ineffective, but there are now presently so many avenues for financing in this Bahamas. For instance, we have persons that are paying $25, $50 a week or $100 a month just to furnish their homes. Have the central bank clarified the authority for these in-house financing institutions? Madam President, it was not clear during my review of the legislation under Section 18, subsection 1, which category in-house financing institutions fall under. However, there are companies that offer lines of credits for cars and furniture that has become very popular in the community. They must also be regulated in an effort to assist consumers with discipline and responsibility. We must ensure there is some system in place to regulate and capture all of these small in-house financing institutions that also apply deductions. While the Credit Bureau will comply information over the next, say, 2 years of any loan arrangements entered into by the consumer, how do we train and teach our people to begin focusing more on saving to self-finance for these sort of necessities? They have deductions for cars, some still paying deductions for cars and catching the bus. We have much work to be done in terms of educating and assisting our people to be prepared and become more responsible with their finances. Madam President, while I have stated my concerns with the consumers, I do not want to use my time. I want to use my time to mention some benefits consumers can expect from the passing of the credit reporting bill. In the long term, consumers can expect, when there's normally the need for security in majority of the cases, and some persons being subject to salary deduction agreements prior to approvals, the credit reporting bill will now allow for consumers to develop reputational collateral, improved access to credit. We should see faster processing time on loan applications, lower financing costs for borrowers with good credit, more disciplined use and management of credit, and business expansion with new credits. I was going to discuss the same points that Senator Henfield raised. I think most of the attorneys would look at the legislation and raise that same point about the banks having a monopoly. And so I want to take this time to thank the AG because he clarified that for me, and I hope that where there are any deficiencies with the monopoly or the cartels, that it will be covered in the regulations. So I move now about reporting. Madam President, presently the bill allows for the Credit Bureau to report to the central bank. But I query, will there be a requirement for an overall statistical report to be prepared and provided to Parliament for review? This report can be produced by the central bank, and as the report would be statistics and refrain from reducing personal information, I query, would it provide statistics on the following? How many license or credit bureau license are granted, how many requests for reports have been made, and the average credit score of Bahamians, and so on. This information, Madam President, would allow parliamentarians to see how effective the legislation is, whether the changes and implementation of the Credit Bureau has assisted in creating more access to credit, have the banks improved their services and interest rates, and it can further show where the law and regulations may need improvement. As lawmakers, we should always be concerned on the performance of any and all pieces of legislation that we bring into effect in the Bahamas, because all of them in some way change the way of life for Bahamians. Madam President, I wanted to mention briefly that the bill also allows for credit bureaus to outsource processing of information abroad. Now, there's a general concern on information flowing abroad. As we are all aware, the Bahamas is a small country, and the bureaus will have information on the majority of Bahamians. Therefore, any outsourcing of information must be strictly controlled. Whilst what is presently drafted is a good start in terms of protection of information and assurances of confidentiality, as time goes on and we review the performance of the bureaus and the advancement and changes of technology, there will be a need for further amendments to the Act, or the regulations that will be promulgated pursuant to the Act must address this. Madam President, lastly, I want to talk about the economy. As I go throughout my normal day, I hear statements in the public, via radio or the streets, WhatsApp or Facebook, phone calls or emails about some situations that persons are facing presently. Some being very impatient because they are faced every day with bills piling up and no way to make ends meet. Madam President, the Bahamian people are hurting. They want answers. And they want to find out ways in which their lives will be changed in the positive. And whilst I have no issue contributing to legislation such as the Credit Reporting Bill, I'm still left to ask, when will we begin to hear about the policies, the projects the plans, and the investments that will positively change the lives of many. Where is the balance? This government must bring some balance to this economy. We have persons without jobs, but we are stating credit reporting will assist persons to be responsible borrowing and teaching them how to save. But what will they save? How can they borrow without income? For example, look at Grand Bahama. We had a job fair that saw some 2,500 persons show up with hope and desperation in their eyes, wanting...
Point of order.
What is your point of order to Senator?
I'm invoking the rule of relevance. We're speaking about the credit reporting bill. She's speaking about a job fair in Grand Bahama. The fact is, we'll have more than ample opportunity during the budget debate to discuss the wide remit of government endeavors in terms of the job market. This is not the debate for that, and I'm invoking the rule on relevance.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Jo Beth, would you continue, please?
Thank you, Madam President. I had nothing negative. Actually, Madam President, I actually was saying nothing negative about the job fair. I think it was a good effort, and hopefully it turns some jobs for persons in Grand Bahama. All I was saying is we still presently have a situation where persons are needing jobs. And I hope that while I am supportive of bringing this legislation, and I am a believer in the potential benefits and of the successful implementation of the credit reporting bill, I'm still advocating for the type of change that will touch the lives of people and the change that will bring hope in the homes in some way where there's despair.
Senator Jo Beth, I think that was understood, and I just ask that you move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, on a point of order.
Okay, could you please state that point of order now?
The senator has misled this honorable chamber. The total amount of persons who registered in Grand Bahama was 1,300, not 2,500. The total amount out of all of our events, or 4 of them, including the Providence, was 2,500. And I can assure all senators that plenty people in Grand Bahama on Saturday got jobs, some of whom will be interviewed live on television over the next couple of days.
Thank you for that clarification, and I'm sure we all can appreciate that clarification. Senator Jo Beth?
Yes, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you very much. Madam President, if I may end with my last 3 or 4 lines. I have presented my concerns on behalf of the people of the Bahamas. While I support this legislation, and I pray that in future we're able to discuss pieces of legislations, policies, investment, or plans that bring about growth in the economy that we all so desire. May God bless the people. May God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Mildred Hall Watson.
We have had our opposition senators speak. Many of us seem to be looking at the same playbook, because I have heard that many of the comments that have been made are very similar in tone. And I think that in large part speaks to the government's desire to present legislation which will be a positive for all people, whether we are government supporters or not. Now, many comments have been made about the legalese, and I will state, as I think all of you and the Bahamas know, I'm not a lawyer. So I have my fellow physician here says hallelujah. So I guess he's happy that he's not a lawyer too. We will go into, I will therefore not go into the legal intricacies of the bill, but I will discuss it as a consumer. With time and discussion, the intricacies and the negatives and positives will come out as some of them have come out today. We will hear more from the opposition, maybe, why it is not just a bill. Well, I've been helped already. Well, I'm so happy to hear that the opposition feels it is their bill. However, I'm even happier to know that we are bringing it to the public. Now, my ability to be discerning is very active, but for those of us who run a business, listen to national news, economic outlooks, general chatter and gossip, we are cognizant of the culture in our country that financial responsibility seems not to be very high on our list of positivities. We tend to shop around for a variety of commodities and services without taking care of the commodity and services that we may have already been open to. The one community we don't seem to shop around for too much is food. Mr. Roberts seemed to have a lock on that. We go to the food store, we pay our food bill. But we know that there's another group who do not extend credit to us, and that's the Chinese. You pay as you go. And even if you are able to get over on the furniture stores, and that has in some ways been mentioned, they seem to have a creative methodology of financing where you would have paid what it is that you owe them. And the comment that was brought up earlier as to how will they be monitored with their in-house financing and therefore credit bureau recording, I think is a valid question and needs to be looked at more closely. If we recall several administrations ago, and I think it was under the Ingram administration, when legislation was proposed to reduce the level of deductions that could be taken out of someone's paycheck, there was a significant pushback about individuals trying to determine that the government could not determine how much of their money they should allow to be taken out of their paycheck. And so it is important that comments made by several of our previous speakers that there needs, in addition to establishing this bill and making it law, that an educational process be put in place so that Bahamians can understand the difference between pleasure now and pain later. Because one of the things that I see as a physician is in our senior population, there is absolutely no savings to take care of our people. The expectation is that the government will do it for me. But I think as a government, we need to spend our monies and resources up front to educate our people about the need to be fiscally responsible for the decisions that they make throughout their lives, not just during a certain earlier period of their lives. As we present this bill, and I do support the bill, The majority of our citizens are honest, they're hardworking, they pay their bills, but there is a small group of individuals who, because of its negative effect, impacts us all. As citizens, it is our responsibility individually and collectively, not just the responsibility of the government, that we must help our family members, our friends, and give the advice that we know they will need in order to make better financial decisions. It is important that business and service providers also have situations when individuals approach them that they can give the kind of advice that that individual needs, because at the end of the day, at the end of the day, it is the business houses that are going to suffer along with that irresponsible consumer. I am pleased by the fact that this bill will begin to bring credit information to light, but what I am even more pleased about, that the central bank, one of our least prejudiced institutions in the country, will be serving as the supervisory and regulatory authority, which will eliminate significant bias in the credit bureaus themselves. With their ability to grant, penalize, revoke licenses, and also have the ability to determine if the information or their agents are fit and proper individuals to perform these duties, this should significantly reduce and or eliminate information given with malicious intent. Under Part 3 of the licensing regulations, it is noted that the minister is advised of the bank's intention to grant a license and does not require permission or acquiescence of the minister. This thus eliminates the possibility of political interference, as the minister does not make the final decision on the licensing. He is to be advised. The business of the central bank must provide the individual applying for a license to the central bank must provide an irrevocable guarantee to the central bank of $200,000. Again, because of this, it is very difficult for any political interference to occur where the bank is instructed to give a license. If the funding is not provided as a guarantee to the central bank, no license is granted. The business cannot go belly up and feel that the funds will be returned to them. The funds are returned at the discretion of the central bank and not by the directive of a political director. The operations must be established within 6 months and not have a license granted in perpetuity, so that individuals can begin their work in establishing their credit bureau as they see fit. So once the guarantee is paid, then you have 6 months to get your business established, which makes it impossible for you to be doing a potential business from an outsider who is just waiting to come in at the last minute. I think these are the kind of regulations that the central bank will be able to put into place once the bill becomes law. This also helps in decreasing the possibility of money laundering, as the central bank must not only receive the funds, they must know the worthiness of the individuals who are presenting the funds, who they will investigate and indicate whether or not they feel that the source of the funds that guarantees this money is something that is legal, open to public discretion, and not be something that is being put forth through monies that are questionable. I would like to see revisited, however, the ownership restriction as a beneficial owner once the central bank finds the irrevocable guarantee to be worthy. Because my feeling is if the irrevocable guarantee is worthy, then 5%, the leader indicated that we have individuals who may have worked in the area of credit bureaus before may want to come home. If a Bahamian returns home and wants to establish outside of banking industry, insurance industry, a credit bureau, and they have the funding in order to establish it, I think it is unreasonable, personally, for them to have no more than a 5% ownership in that business. As a result of the rules and regulations of this bill and the oversight by the central bank, the initial outcomes may appear to be slightly draconian to some individuals who may feel that they should not be instructed by government to do things. But in the long term, it will serve to strongly encourage individuals and institutions to not spend or loan recklessly and create a negative and/or unnecessary information on themselves, so that we will have a more open area for individuals to be available and eligible for loans. My concern in some areas is that clean and protected systems are developed, and I am happy that it is the central bank who will be doing this. As our government leader stated earlier in his presentation, that it's like a fortress. And therefore, I think we can all feel comfortable that the oversight that the central bank will have is to protect the security of our Bahamians' information, and that it is something that we need have little concern regarding. Overall, Madam President, I support the government leader in his presentation of this bill by the F&M government. I think there is some tweaking that can be done. The two things that I'm most concerned about is the 5% ownership, and the second thing is the need. There has to be a need for public education regarding fiscal responsibility. And I think with that in place, this bill will go far to improving our economy in the Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Asmani. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jasmine Darius.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today in this honorable House to firstly give glory and majesty to God for his many blessings over the Bahama land. It is with a great sense of honor that I am afforded this noble opportunity to stand and do the people's business and be a part of the people's government. I begin this morning by congratulating this minister-led administration for the economic advancement and opportunities that are on stream, especially for the island of Grand Bahama. Oban Energies has signed a heads of agreement for a $5.5 billion oil facility in East Grand Bahama to service vessels transporting crude oil to the U.S. East Coast and Gulf of Mexico states. The oil refinery and storage facility was signed on February 19, 2018. It is an oil storage. This is a great economic opportunity because there will be an 80% reserve jobs for Bahamians, where training and educational programs will be afforded. Oban Energies has committed to use local suppliers. They have committed to implement a housing community for residents and locals. And they've also dedicated to invest in job training, structured training programs, apprenticeships, and management training programs, along with investing in our local university. Grand Bahama is poised for explosive economic growth, as there are many other projects that are coming on stream. To name a few, the Grand Lacayan Project, the West End Project, formerly known as the GIN, the Technology Hub Initiative. And I believe that in about 8 to 12 months, even those on the opposite side would wish that they were on this winning team. In our Prime Minister's January 2018 national address, he said, and I quote, "2018 will be a year of growth, investment, new jobs, and economic opportunity."
A point of order, Madam President.
The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Mike Darville.
Thank you so much.
And your point of order is?
Is that the degree and the need for the relevancy in this debate. We have spoken to the leader opposite, and we have agreed that this piece of legislation is a non-contentious piece of legislation, and the senator in her contribution is not being relevant to the debate, and I can be just as contentious if I choose to be, but in view of the agreements that have been laid down by the leader and myself, we want to push on and move this piece of legislation through very rapidly. It's good for the Bahamian people. And if we want to debate about other issues that is happening in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, we have the midterm budget debate where we will be able to speak about things that are concerned to the side opposite, and I'm certain you can speak as it relates to things that are happening in the country. So I want to caution the senator that we should stick with the degree of relevance. My senator, Jobeth Colby Davis, was cautioned by the leader on the side opposite, and she was compliant, and so I'm asking for the same privileges to be extended to us on this side.
Thank you, Senator. I would ask that Senator Darius please bear in mind, and to all senators who will be addressing this bill afterward, that we are, in fact, speaking on the credit reporting bill, and I would want to encourage you, Senator Darius, to get to that portion of your remarks that speaks to the credit reporting bill.
Yes, ma'am. But just before I do, I would like to also commend Senator the Honorable Dion Folks for the awesome job that he did with taking labor to the blocks in Grand Bahama. The idea was a great one, and some have been hired, and this initiative has created a huge database for those that are ready for employment. Getting to the credit reporting bill. Madam President, the purpose of this bill and government legislation is to promote the accuracy, fairness, and privacy of consumer information contained in the files of consumer reporting agencies. Also to provide safety mechanisms for data protection for customers of credit providers and for other related matters. This act regulates the collection of credit information and access to your credit report or history. The laws about credit reporting are intended to balance individuals' interests in protecting their personal data information with the need to ensure that credit providers have sufficient information available to assist them in deciding whether or not to give individual credit. According to the Central Bank of the Bahamas, the purpose of the bill is to introduce for the first time a legal system of credit reporting within the financial system in the Bahamas to enable credit information sharing and reporting, and thereby facilitate objective credit decisions by financial institutions and other credit providers. The central bank will have responsibility for the general administration supervision, and implementation of this act and regulation. This bill also provides the Central Bank of the Bahamas to be the issuer of licenses and regulatory authority for credit bureaus and to impose protection of data for credit providers, evaluate applications, issue guidelines for operation, inspect premises, issue standards and targets regarding the provision of credit reporting services pursuant to this act, and credit reporting. The central bank will also impose penalties for contravention, levy fixed penalty, and suspend or revoke the licenses of a credit bureau. This bill further calls for bureaus to be audited yearly and report audited financial statements and a compliance report to the central bank. These credit bureaus will not be permitted to expose the depth of information of any creditor unless it is expressed in writing according to the bill, nor any other personal information. Furthermore, this bill provides for general offenses in relation to making of false or misleading statements and for the failure to comply with an order, notice, or direction under the Act or regulation. Some of the benefits under this credit reporting bill, this Act requires credit reporting agencies to provide you with information in your credit file once a year, and as the Attorney General stated, without cost. This Act also limits access to your file to those with a valid need, which would be banks, insurance companies, employers, landlords, or others doing business that involves offering credit. And you will also have a right to know who and what requested your credit information. If inaccurate information is discovered on your file, the Consumer Reporting Agency must examine the disputed information, and if the inaccurate information cannot be verified, the Consumer Reporting has the responsibility to remove it. Also, the data subject information can be removed after 5 years on your file, so no further reference will be disclosed to affect your credit rating. Borrowers with good payment history will find it easier to obtain credit and at lower interest rates. This bill also provides for a credit bureau with the central bank's approval that can outsource or subcontract the processing of data information. We may be an island nation, but we are implementing policy and legislation on a first-class international best practices underlying our credit reporting system. Our Deputy Prime Minister, in his address, he said that dialogue and communication has been made between the Bahamas government, commercial banks, other stakeholders, the World Bank, and the International Finance Corporation, credit unions, insurance companies, money lenders, and utilities. The Bahamas is at present ready to have a fully functioning, modernized credit reporting system where the advantages will be great and many to facilitate economic growth in this country. I support this credit reporting bill.
As many? Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jamal Moss.
Madam President, once again, it is an honor and pleasure to stand here to give my contribution on this much needed and timely bill. As always, I want to thank God above, the ever creator, most merciful and loving God, for allowing me to be here to make another meaningful contribution to my people. Also, I wish to once again to publicly thank my leader and Prime Minister, Dr. the Honorable Hubert Alexander Minnis, for allowing a barefoot boy from Crooked Island, but who later grew up in Nassau, to be able to stand before you today in this honorable house to speak on behalf of the youth of this unique but great nation. Today we are here to talk about the credit reporting bill. This bill is the framework for establishing a credit bureau. This is another feather in the Minnis administration's hat as it seeks to once again modernize and bring the Bahamas to international standards. This bill being the first of its kind to introduce a legal framework of credit reporting within the financial system in the Bahamas to allow credit information sharing, informing and thereby expedite objective credit rulings on services including the licensing of data of credit providers. On January 31st, 2018, inside the House of Assembly, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, the Honorable Peter Turnquist, said, and I quote, "The exercise leading up to the credit reporting bill was thorough and included consultations with relevant stakeholders. The principles included in this bill conform to international best practices underlying the credit reporting systems." He further explained that care has been taken to ensure that the rights of customers will be protected through appropriate oversight and an appeals process, which is the key to ensuring that the integrity of the system. The Bahamas Credit Bureau project was launched by the Central Bank of the Bahamas back in 2010 for the purpose of establishing a national credit reporting system in the Bahamas, inclusive of the Credit Bureau. The Deputy Prime Minister explained the following on extensive dialogue with the government, the commercial banks, and other private sector stakeholders, the World Bank and the International Finance Corporation, the IFC, with the assistance from the Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, which carried out an assessment in February 2010 to determine whether or not the Bahamas, the existing regime, could support a fully functioning credit reporting system. Madam President, what I like about this bill is it states that the credit information should be reliable where it is accurate in all materials respects and presented in a fair and balanced manner. Also, it seeks to bring life and the need to improve lending activities by financial institutions. It also provides customers with an idea of how lending activities will be monitored once the credit bureau is established. According to the bill, a credit information provider, banks and other financial institutions that furnishes data to a credit bureau should disclose the amount and nature of the loans granted by a credit provider, the nature of a security provided by a security provider, the nature of any guarantee or other non-fund basic facility, and information in relation to transactions involving a credit provider, such as income, creditworthiness, and financial transaction. Madam President, in this bill, it empowers the Minister of Finance to appoint a date for the bill to come into operation after enactment. This bill also emboldens the central bank as the supervisory and regulatory authority, or as we would say on the streets, be the big dog who will keep the eye out to ensure that all is followed. The central bank will be responsible for the general administration, supervision, and implementation of the Act and regulations. In addition to the central bank authority, this bill will give them the power to function and carry out their duties. As it states in the proposed bill, they will have the right, without prejudice, to 1, grant licenses to a credit bureau in the Bahamas, 2, be allowed to evaluate every applicant made pursuant to Section 6 for a license to operate or carry on the business of a credit bureau. And as I read part 6, it says, application for license. It says 1, an application of a grant of a license to operate or carry out the business of a credit bureau in the Bahamas shall be submitted to the central bank in the form and manner prescribed by the regulations. 2 of that section, it states that an applicant shall comply with a request made by the central bank for the submission of any additional information or supporting document that the bank may require in order to determine the eligibility of the applicant of the grant of the license. 3, the issues guidelines regarding the operations of the credit bureaus. And last but not least, well, the list goes on, inspect the premises, systems, and operations of applications and credit bureaus. Madam President, earlier I touched on the point of how Central Bank will have the authority to grant licenses, but in Clause 8, Central Bank also has the right to refuse licenses. It says in the proposed bill in subsection 2, the central bank shall not grant a license where, 1, the application is not made in accordance with the Act and regulations. 2, the application has, with respect to a matter that the bank considers a material statement in the application or in the information, particulars, declarations, documents, or other materials submitted to the bank in support of the application, and 3, or it is not in the public interest to grant the license. As relates to the duration of the license and payment fees, a license granted pursuant to this part shall be valid from the date of the grant unless the license is suspended or revoked in accordance with Section 13. As I read Section 13, it says the suspension and revocation of license. 1, subject to subsection 2, the central bank may suspend or revoke a license granted to a credit bureau where the credit bureau has failed to comply with 1, a term, a condition specified in the license, 2, a provision of this act, the regulations, or any other law to which is subject, 3, a direction issued pursuant to this act within the time specified the credit bureau. So as you can see, this bill expects full compliance from all sundry. Thank you. In Section 15, the bill directs or mandates central bank to publish in the newspapers, media, online, etc., notices of a grant, suspension, revocation, or reinstatement of license. Another important section of this bill I wish to highlight is that it provides for the appointment annually of an independent auditor by the credit bureau and obligates a credit bureau to deliver annually to the central bank audited financial statements and compliance report. The independent auditor shall be appointed within 14 days, and central bank shall be notified in writing of the appointment of the auditor. Madam President, this bill provides for the regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services, including the licenses by central bank of credit bureaus, and institutes safeguards for the protection of the data of customers of the credit providers. This bill ensures that the consent requirements are in place, and give me a second. As it states in the bill in Section 25, it states as in, except with the consent of data subject, a subscriber shall not request or obtain to credit report for a permissible purpose in respect of the data subject. 2, a credit bureau shall not release data subject information to a user that is not a party to a subscriber agreement unless the credit bureau verifies the identities of the data subject and the user. 2, verifies the data subject has given consent for the release of the data subject information to the user, and C, uses reasonable means of transmission that ensures that the data subject credit report is not altered, modified, or corrupted during the transmission process. So as you can see, Madam President, once again, this bill may not be perfect, but then it has the necessary safeguards to ensure that the information is handled in the strictest form or fashion. I want to assure the Bahamian people that this is not a toothless bill. This bill appears to have teeth and strength like Samson. The bill might not be perfect, as I said earlier, but the reality is this: we cannot please everybody. But overall, this bill, in my personal view, is on the right path in keeping the Bahamas on the positive road of accountability and transparency in the international community. Madam President, as I close, the last point I wish to highlight is clauses 28. Clause 28 prohibits the supply of false information or misleading information on a data subject to a credit bureau. It says that no person shall knowingly, negligently, or recklessly supply false or misleading information regarding data subject to credit bureau. This bill further notes that any person found doing this commits an offense. And again, I want to say it again. No person shall knowingly, negligently, or recklessly supply false or misleading information regarding data subject to a credit bureau. The bill further notes that any person found doing this commits an offense. Madam President, as I have stated earlier, this bill, in my view, is a bill that will propel us to meet the requirements and obligations within the international community. The minister-led administration is focused on ensuring that the persons living here in the Bahamas, whether local or international, are protected by this bill and at the same time comply with it to ensure that all safeguards are met and followed for the protection of the data of customers of credit providers. This government continues to do this country proud locally and internationally, and again, I support this much-needed bill. Thank you.
As many? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Jenny Dotson Isaacs. Jenny Isaacs, Dotson, sorry.
Madam President and fellow senators, again, good afternoon. This new bill sets out the structure to establish credit bureaus and is a novel one that provides the foundation for Bahamians to be approved or denied credit by lending agencies based on their history of borrowing and debt servicing. The bill sets out tight regulations that will be used to protect the sensitive credit history information of Bahamians. The bill will allow Bahamians to know their credit rating locally, credit positive for the Bahamas, and open the door for the introduction of a credit bureau which will be looked upon positively by rating agencies such as Moody's and Standard & Poor's. Madam President, this bill will force all Bahamians to practice financial prudency, develop budgets that they will follow, save more, and most of all, pay their bills on time. It will teach our young people the importance of investing and that that investment should not just be in a car, which loses its value from the minute you buy it. It will provide transparency and ways to improve lending various activities by financial institutions, and will also give consumers an idea of how lending various activities will be monitored once the credit bureau is established. As Senator Henfield has already said, that the majority have been punished by the banks, etc., for the failure of a few to repay loans. Madam President, the bill introduces a legal system of credit reporting within the legal systems in the Bahamas to enable credit information sharing and reporting, and thereby facilitate objective credit decisions by financial institutions and other credit providers. The Central Bank of the Bahamas will be the entity that will issue licenses for credit bureaus and enforce safety measures for the protection of data customers of credit providers. Further, the Central Bank of the Bahamas will be the supervisory and regulatory authority of the country's credit reporting system, which will be, according to the bill, allowed to be outsourced or subcontracted to the entity outside of the Bahamas. In addition, the bill also calls for bureaus to be audited annually, report audited financial statements, and a compliance report to the Central Bank of the Bahamas. The bill states, the bill provides for the regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services, including the licensing by the Central Bank of Credit Bureaus, and institutes safeguards for the protection of the data of customers of credit providers. Madam President, in addition, the bill provides for general offenses in relation to the making of false or misleading statements and for the failure to comply with an order, notice, or direction under the Act or the regulations. Madam President, the Credit Bureau will not be allowed to expose the debt information of any creditor unless it is expressed in writing according to the bill, nor any other such personal information. Madam President, the Credit Bureau, according to the legislation, will only be able to issue credit information in the case that it is the purchase or collection of a debt of the data subject, entry into or renewal of a tenancy agreement with the data subject, the person whose credit history is being sought, underwriting of insurance involving the data subject, pre-employment check of the data subject for a position involving significant financial risk, used in connection with a business or credit transaction involving the data subject, periodic portfolio monitoring and risk assessment purposes, collection and skip tracing, and any other permissible purpose as the central bank may, from time to time, specify in the regulations that will be drafted. Madam President, the bill states that credit information should be reliable, where it is accurate in all material respects, and presented in a fair and balanced manner. The Credit Bureau is able to take necessary security and control measures in order to avoid the legal interception or interruption of the data, accidental or unauthorized interruption of the data, and other misuse regarding the data. Madam President, the bill further states that the purpose of the bill is to introduce a legal system of credit reporting within the financial system of the Bahamas to enable credit information sharing and reporting and thereby facilitate objective credit decisions by financial institutions and other credit providers. It goes on to say that in the event a person is denied credit as a result of negative information contained in a credit report, the credit provider may be prescribed by regulations to notify the person of the denial, and the person denied can request a copy of the credit report from the Credit Bureau. The bill also cautions that no person shall knowingly, negligently, or recklessly supply false or misleading information regarding a data subject to a credit bureau. It is found out that you have done this, it would be considered an offense in the bill. Yes. Madam President, we must be concerned about the impact that this bill will have on the workers of this country whose salaries cannot keep up with the cost of living, borrowing money that leaves them with a take-home pay of pittance. This bill raises concerns about confidentiality of the information supplied to the Credit Bureau and the effect it will have on workers in this country, particularly as it relates to the publishing of a list of good-paying consumers. Everyone in the Bahamas knows everyone that we love to talk. And what is the penalty in the bill for divulging confidential information? And I think that the leader of government has already cleared this up. There is a penalty for a credit bureau that knowingly, negligently, or willfully contravenes subsection 1 and commits an offense. Also in the bill, it says that the credit information provider will provide accurate, again I say accurate information to the credit bureau. However, what happens if inaccurate information is provided? When will the regulations that may be made by the Central Bank of the Bahamas that provides for the correction of incomplete, obsolete, misleading, erroneous, or inaccurate credit information kept and maintained by a credit bureau in relation to a subject be developed? Other areas of concern that should be addressed in the bill are compensation for false or negligent credit reports, and in reference to judgment creditors should also have to provide verification from the courts as well that the debt has been paid. Madam President, overall, the bill provides a framework for the Bahamas to establish its own credit bureau, which is a step in the right direction. However, we must ensure that the structures established are unique and relevant to the Bahamas. Most Bahamians are honest, hard-working citizens who pay their bills, and the credit bureaus will see this in their work and in this novel structure. As Bahamians like to say, I only have my good name, so they will ensure that their good name has a positive credit rating. Yes. Education and training is critical as the world of work is changing to a more hands-on technological society. The banks want senior citizens to do online banking instead of coming into the bank and actually the majority of the customers. Therefore, the bank should do some seminars and workshops to teach senior citizens and others to feel and become more comfortable with online banking. This is a step in the right direction for the country, as it will stimulate our economy and improve the speed of lending. I therefore stand to support the Credit Reporting Bill 2017.
As many? Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Clay Sweeting, my favorite person in the House when it comes to Madam President.
You know, nobody says it like I do. That's right, you know. Madam President, it is indeed an honor to stand here today to represent and to speak on behalf of the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I am always proud to speak on their behalf and to provide my contribution in this honorable chamber. I never take it lightly, for this is an opportunity not afforded to many. Before I make my contribution on the credit reporting bill, I must take this opportunity to pay my respects to my late grandmother, my cheerleader, Pearl Elizabeth Higgs, who passed away on Majority Rule Day this year. She was the matriarch of our family and a supportive figure for me politically and personally. She was a woman that was loved island-wide, and she was infectious with her love and her laughter. She truly enjoyed life, but most of all, she loved her family and her God. We find comfort in knowing that she has gone to a better place and that we will see her one day. May her soul rest in peace. Madam President, I stand here today along with my colleagues in support of this bill. And I'm going to try to make it short and sweet. The credit reporting industry is growing worldwide, spurred by high-tech innovation and the liberalization of financial markets. Economic forces, both positive and negative, have also encouraged the development of credit reporting. The credit reporting bill should provide rapid access to accurate and reliable standardized information on potential borrowers. This should enable lenders to evaluate credit risk more accurately and to reduce lending processing time and costs. This in turn promotes profitability and increased credit activity. But it seems that the key risks in the Bahamas and the Caribbean at large in reference to lending are stagnant loan demands, and where we are a tourism-based country with a deteriorating tourism loans, non-performing residential mortgage loans, and the lack of active mortgage markets to absorb the pool of properties held by the banks. I am sure that the positives should outweigh the negative impacts or implications of this bill, but there are just a few queries that I have on this bill. Number one, will this bill create corresponding reduction of interest rates? In the U.S., you can borrow for anywhere from 2 to 3%, but here we pay interest rates as high as 10% at some lending institutions. In the United States, when most lending is very short term, 30 to 90 days, the data in a credit registry is less important than a firm's cash flow or a person's liquid cash. But when terms grow to many months or years, data on past behavior becomes a more important indicator of likely repayment. Number two, what steps are taken to protect the consumer's privacy? According to this bill, financial institutions are required to report on a regular basis. However, in some countries, it's typically monthly, and usually on both their commercial and consumer borrowers. In most cases, information is requested on borrowers regardless of their standing, Not only negative data is collected on late payments or defaults, but also positive information on credit exposure in good or normal conditions. The information is used as part of the supervision process, as well as distributed back to the financial institutions who provided the data. Madam President, in most countries, access to data is typically limited, so only institutions who provide data have access to it. I do have a concern with privacy and confidentiality within these institutions. In response to confidentiality concerns from reporting institutions, the total credit exposure for a borrower is often combined, and the names of the lending institutions are omitted before being distributed. So I also have a concern for the consumer's privacy, even though in Part 4, subsection 23, there are security and control measures to be put in place. But there is always concern for privacy and control measures that ought to be put in place in this country, especially when it comes to banking. I know Senator Bethel already spoke to the privacy guarantee of central bank, or the fortress like he says, but I was speaking to a banker earlier this week, and he told me that they do speak to one another, even though they don't have the proper with privacy laws. They do speak to one another to get information on people that's applying for mortgages or credits or things of that sort. Madam President, economic crisis, which have roots in financial sector strain, have also encouraged some nations to establish credit agencies. One of the causes of the 1994 Mexican tequila crisis was the non-performance of many loans in the banking sector. But I wonder if that is why we are here today, because of so many delinquent loans. A clear pattern shows that from 2008 to the present, delinquent loans increased in this country from 6% to 15.7%. You see, how it works now is that our people borrow more than they can afford. Some persons in this country borrow as high as 80% of their salary and leaves very little funds for food, electricity, and other necessities. In this country, some individuals have 2 or 3 loans to one bank, then they go to another bank and they borrow money there as well. Privacy laws in our country currently prevent banks from sharing this information, but like I said before, of course they talk to one another and who to lend money to and things of that sort. This bill will hopefully help to alleviate some of this problem, but the social ills will still remain, and that is where educating the public is key. A closer public-private dialogue could also be very beneficial in this sector. We need to educate the consumers and the people of this country of the pros, the cons, the positive and the adverse effects of this bill and the trade-off between privacy and the cost and access to credit. We do not want this to just creep up on the Bahamian people without proper due diligence. Madam President, while this bill is a step in the right direction to modernize our credit environment, of course there are always concerns with new legislation, but of course we do support it. Governments, of course, are continuous. Administrations inherit the accomplishments and the difficulties of the administrations that have gone before. Madam President, just for a reference, the lobster fishermen of this country have made little or no money since September. They lost an estimated $12 million in condos and apparatus, and they have not been able to come close to replacing what they have lost. Lending institutions view fishermen and farmers as high risk, even though they do make the money, but they still find it hard to lend to them. My hopes are that with the introduction of this bill, it will in turn enable fishermen and farmers with a good credit rating the means to borrow much needed funds to establish and grow their industries. My hope is that these same hard-working people, same hard-working Bahamians, will not have to encounter the hardship of locating funding like they do now. Because at this present period, if individuals on the boat don't have the money, or someone who they know doesn't have the money, they will not be able to borrow, to lend, to set condos, and that's why some boats now are finding a hard time to be successful. But at the end of the day, when we debate and pass legislation in this place, my hopes is that it benefits our country and the hardworking people in it. Madam President, like I said, I was to be short and sweet, but I just want the best for my country. I want the best for my islands, and I hope and pray that we stand on one accord in that respect. I am a Bahamian, I love my country, and I have great hopes for it. It is for this reason that I speak candidly and sometimes am critical. I have benefited greatly from the freedom that exists in my country, and for this I am eternally grateful. Madam President, with that being said, I support this bill. May God bless the people, and may God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Senator. As many? No, you're next. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Dion Folks.
Madam Speaker, I wish to move that the business of the Senate do continue beyond the 1 o'clock hour. Do I obtain a second?
I rise to second, Madam President.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate continue beyond 1 o'clock. All those in favor would say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The business of the Senate will now continue beyond 1 o'clock.
Madam President, I fully support the bill before us. Consumer affairs falls under our ministry, and we have been doing a lot over the last 6 months, 7 months, to strengthen the regulations as they relate to consumer affairs. The Prices Commission, which is chaired by Mrs. Senator Dossett, is doing a wonderful job. The Consumer Protection Commission, which is chaired by Mr. Philip Beneby, is also doing an excellent job. Also, the Standards Bureau, which is governed by Dr. Renee Buford, she is doing a wonderful job. The whole question of protecting the consumer is paramount to our ministry. The whole question of obtaining credit ratings and credit reports, as most countries around the world have, is very important. Successive governments have been talking about this for many times, as the learned Attorney General said earlier. Both our previous governments and the PLP government have been working on this bill. So it's been a long time coming, and from our point of view, we're very happy to have it. One of the main things that affect a credit rating in a negative way is when a person becomes unemployed or underemployed or leaves school and cannot find a job and therefore cannot establish a credit rating in order to qualify for the various things at our commercial banks. One of the things that we have done, and I'm very happy to see that the IDB yesterday, I think it was Dr. Rose, Alan Rose, speaking at the Chamber conference that's going on now by the Chamber of Commerce. He specifically mentioned the initiative that we are doing called Labor on the Blocks. And he said that it's a good initiative. And he said you can never go wrong when you bring potential employees with employers.
Very good.
And he was, I was very gratified to see that we got that commendation from the IDB. We have had, as the senator opposite has mentioned, we have had approximately 2,500 persons who have registered in our database as a result of the job fairs that we have had so far, Madam President. Out of those, in Nassau, we have recorded so far, and I just spoke to two of the major hotels today in Nassau, we have recorded so far 800 persons who have received jobs. I got a report today out of Grand Bahama, and we're still counting in Grand Bahama. Certain persons got hired on the spot, and there are a group of persons who are working now as a result of what happened on Saturday in Grand Bahama, who are being interviewed by one of the local TV stations. Every time there is an event, a labor fair, we call Labor on the Blocks, we learn our lessons. The first one that we had at Sarah Ingram Park, we had about 500 persons that showed up over a 4-hour period. One of the gentlemen who got a job on the spot at Sarah Ingram Park was a young man at the age of 22. He saw us setting up the tents, and he lived right next to the park. And he came out and he asked us, well, what's going on here? And we told him. He went inside, changed, came out in the Sunday best, and he got a job that day. So this is definitely working. We are trying to take the kinks out of the systems that we're using. The two events we had in Nassau, the days were cool. I think they were in January. I think it was like around 72 degrees. So we thought that Freeport would be the same. But I think Freeport last week Saturday was close to around 85, 86 degrees. It was very hot.
It didn't stop the people.
And but as Senator Darius said, the people did come out. And they came out early, from 5:30 in the morning. They started to line up at Columbus Park. And I would like to congratulate the workers. 10 workers from the department came from Nassau to Freeport. In addition to that, there were 8 persons in Freeport who were specifically trained to operate our PC recruiter. So altogether, we had close to 14, 15 labor officers working. And they worked from 11 o'clock until 5, 6 o'clock without taking a break. So I would really wish to congratulate them. Mr. Kendall Culmer, the chief consular for Freeport, he and his team really worked hard. All of the MPs were there. MP Turnquist, the deputy prime minister, was present. Mr. Kwesi Thompson, Senator, Minister Thompson was also present. MP McAlpine was also present. Senator Darius was also present. Madam President came out, and she was also present, and I appreciate you coming out to show support, Madam President, in Grand Bahama. I know I'm missing somebody. Pakisha, yes, I can't leave Pakisha. Pakisha and I and Senator Darius and a group of us, because of the heat, we gave out some 30, 40 cases of water. And we had a constant supply of water, and we walked the lines and gave them out, just to make sure that the residents were comfortable. The great thing about this is that all of these persons that come out to these events are in our database forever. They're registered, so whenever opportunities come up, we're able to send them on job interviews. Whether they get a job now or not, it doesn't matter. We have them recorded. And Madam President, I also wish to say that in addition to the companies, we had all the training institutions there. Some private and some public. We had the University of Bahamas, BTVI, and NTA. We had Mr. Anderson from Pine Yard Academy. This is in Freeport. Pine Yard Steel. Thank you, Senator Darius. We have also been approached by 2 Caribbean countries from CARICOM. They want to get our model for labor on the blocks. They think it's a wonderful initiative. The directors of labor from these 2 countries have approached us to do the same thing. Madam President, with respect to RBC, I spoke at length in this chamber about an unfortunate incident concerning one of the senior managers at RBC. with some comments that he made at an event. The F&M government, as I said then, and I will say again, have the full confidence of Bahamian workers in the financial services sector. And I use myself as an example, having worked at Citibank in the Euro-dollar department. And a lot of these banks, all of these banks make a lot of money. And they make money because of our blood, sweat, and tears. That is how they make their profits. So the comments that was made by this particular individual was not well received by the Bahamian public. It was not well received by the F&M government, nor the opposition. And I do not want any particular person or any particular grouping to take credit for what has happened with respect to this person. I think that we are beyond that as a country. I think RBC did the right thing, and it is the end result that matters. It doesn't matter whether it's done because Dr. Prime Minister Hubert Minnis calls the headquarters in Canada, or Brave Davis, leader of the opposition, called the headquarters, or the Minister of Labor called somebody. That doesn't matter. It's the end result that matters. We want the best for the country. And I just want to make that clear. I think most people know what I'm talking about. But I just want to make that very clear. But I would like to say, I'd like to also thank the Deputy Prime Minister, who made a very clear statement, Madam President, with respect to this matter, and it was recorded in the press. With respect to the whole question of lending and the ability of banks to lend funds to Bahamians who may not have the requisite capital requirements. I have always been of the view that commercial banks in this country are quick to lend for consumer items. Once you have a paycheck and you have a steady job, especially government job, banks are quick to lend for furniture, stove, fridge, vacations, cars. But when a young Bahamian with a good idea, who's disciplined, who's educated, come with a business proposal to open up a business, dog, eat your lunch. They ain't checking. We need to find a way to change that in our country. Both governments have come up with various different type of venture capital fund, but we need to address that seriously. Some of us have young children who are of age to get into business, and they are experiencing the same, they are going through the same thing that every young Bahamian business person is going through. It is very difficult. And banks are liquid in this country. They got tons of money. As a matter of fact, the interest rate on savings account now at some of the banks is either 2%, 1%, or 0%, because they don't need your money. 0.01 cents under the speeding is there. And so it is good for us to do the credit rating. It is good for us to ensure that as consumer and as Bahamians, we are responsible in our spending and in our accountability to pay our loans back and pay our mortgages. But at the same time, I would encourage the banks to be a little bit more liberal in lending to Bahamians, especially those who want to go into business. Because at the end of the day, we could be generating millions and billions of dollars here in this country, in the tourism sector, in the financial sector, but the real contribution to the economy is when a Bahamian open up a business and generate income for him and his family and his employees. So with those few words, Madam President, I wish to commend this bill to the Senate, and I wish to congratulate the leader, the learned Attorney General, for an excellent presentation that he made in presenting this bill.
As many. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Michael Dowell.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Like my colleagues, I don't intend to be long. I'd like to say from the onset that we support the bill. We understand the importance of the bill, and we know that the bill will change the environment that currently exists in the banking institution in our country to ensure that Bahamian borrowers are protected, as well as the institutions have access to information to make proper decisions. But before I start my substantive contribution, the Minister of Labor was speaking, and I did not want to interrupt him. I first agree with him that there's a consensus, I believe, across the table where we can come together and begin to discuss possibilities where the banking institutions can make more liquid loans that can help entrepreneurs, young Bahamians, have access to capital to be able to go ahead and become entrepreneurs. So that is a common ground that I believe we have on both sides of the table. And as a senator and someone who is concerned about the advancement of business, I look forward for us having deeper discussions on ways how we can challenge financial institutions to produce liquid capital where young entrepreneurs can have access to capital for good business ideas. The second thing is that I know the minister is responsible for the job fair that took place on the island of Grand Bahama, and he's my cousin and he sugarcoated. But the reality is I think he should select a better venue to ensure that people who come to these events have access to a nice cool area where they can sit and wait until they can be assessed, and the list goes on and on. So I don't want to belittle a point, but the reality is the venue was terrible and a lot of people were subjected to unnecessary conditions.
Just on a point of...
No,
just on a point of
can I hold on one second? Now,
it's a matter of opinion.
Look, I allowed some latitude for the minister, some of the senators to give some brief interventions on this matter. I would really like Dr. Dowell to be able to complete, and you all know my stance in here. If you wish to have something to say, we can do it, but I'm going to allow Dr. Dowell to complete his full presentation.
Thank you, Madam President, for protecting me from my cousin. My good cousin. And I wouldn't go any further on that, but before I start my contribution and to just lend my voice to us on this side who support the bill, I would like to just point the Senate to an article that was published on April the 12th, 2017 by Ontario McKinsey, Credit Bureau, Eye-Opener for Debt-Laden Bahamians. And I would like to quote some aspects from this particular article and use it as my own voice. John Roll, yes, I adopt these. John Roll, Wendy's Craig predecessor, told the Tribune, business, successor, sorry about that, yeah, business, that legislation for the Bahamas Credit Bureau creation is in its final draft form, with the next government having the task to bringing it to Parliament. The legislation is in its final draft. It's only an issue now for it being taken to Parliament for full approval. In the Bahamian context, a credit bureau should help borrowers improve their credit and payment behavior, while lenders will have increased access to accurate and more comprehensive information about the borrower, credit history, and payment habits. This, in turn, would reduce their exposure to risky loans. Senator Henfield, in his presentation, was very extensive about the issue with the borrower and the lender, and I agree that a lot was said today from the various senators, particularly on our side, Senator Sweeting and Senator Jobeth Colby Davis. But for me, Madam President, I just would like to say a few things, and I agree that we need, as a mechanism to support this particular piece of legislation, follow up with education to ensure that our local population understands fully the direction we're heading in. It's very important that our population develop the mindset, the responsibility, as well as a full understanding where we're heading and where the country will be going in the future. Today, I'm grateful to stand once again in this honorable house, and it's truly an honor and a privilege to serve my country and to use this platform for what it's designed for, and that is to contribute to the growth and development of the Bahamas in a positive way. Madam President, let me say from the onset that I support this important piece of legislation as it allows for the introduction of proper legal framework for credit reporting throughout the country, which would enable credit information sharing and reporting. Madam President, over the last 10 years, I've come across many persons, mainly government employees, who after years of high salary deductions are left with nothing to buy food and pay necessities at the end of the month. As a former member of Parliament, I confronted this time and time again. We've had workshops in our constituency to try to advise individuals of the danger of overextending yourself and not being able to make the necessary fundamental commitments to the family. More specifically, I've heard of countless stories from persons who have overextended themselves and seem to allow this urge and accessibility from lending institutions that resulted in poverty. I know of individuals who overextended themselves to a point where they became homeless and unable to even buy food. This is the reality in our country. And all of us who have had the opportunity to be members of Parliament in the city constituencies understand how complicated and how difficult it is to control this urge for borrowing even beyond your capability to pay back. There's some individuals who, for some strange reason, only can see the funding that they can get from borrowing and truly do not understand the steps necessary to pay back these loans. So education is one of those things that we have to work on. And I agree, from the lead-in, from the side opposite, I believe that we have a consensus on this issue, that there has to be a way, along with the passing of this bill, to put something substantial in place where the common man can become educated about the dangers of borrowing and what it means to him, his family, and his lifelong survival. Madam President, this is a reality that many hard-working people throughout our country experience. While in office, we implemented and explored many ways to put in place checks and balances in the system to prevent people from overborrowing. I'm certain, just as we were looking when we were in government, the Free National Movement should be doing the same, because it's an issue that affects not only political organizations, but families across the board. I am pleased, nonetheless, that this piece of legislation will pave the way for credit reporting, would prevent persons from qualifying for risky loans, and eventually reduce the default rate in the country. Madam President, as the government should, we are continuous. Under the Ingram administration, the bill was being drafted. We took a special interest in the bill. We brought it to where it was, and we knew that the next government, whether it be PLP or F&M, would have to bring this legislation to Parliament and, at the end of the day, begin to implement the right environment necessary for us to survive as a country and our economy to grow. This important piece of legislation will serve to protect consumers and lending institutions, regulate and conduct credit reporting and services, including licensing of credit bureaus, by the central bank, and ensure the protection of data of consumers from credit providers. This bill allows our country to finally join other countries in CARICOM. And Senator Henfield spoke specifically Jamaica, Trinidad, and even Guyana, who have put in place these credit reporting agencies, and they have been in place for some time. He also mentioned that Jamaica And its statistics in the ease of doing business indicated clearly that with the implementation of the credit rating agencies, we definitely saw them improving with the ease of doing business. But one of the things that he didn't say is that we know that Jamaica took out a special IDB loan that helped them organize themselves to improve the ease of doing business. And this was something that we looked at when we were in government, to find the necessary resources in order for us to look at all of the criteria, which is about 11 criteria, that is used to determine the factors associated with the ease of doing business in the country, and to find ways to reduce the bureaucracy across the board in government agencies to be able to do this. Now, I know that the current administration spoke about a committee with the ease of doing business, and that committee is functioning, I understand. I'm waiting patiently for the preliminary reports on their ideas on how they would improve the ease of doing business in the country. But it is something that runs deep, and the bureaucracy that currently exists across the board in ministries is definitely not helping the situation, and the government must work diligently to actually open the doors to reduce the amount of bureaucracy necessary in order for business people to be able to move from point A to point B and subsequently establish an organization. Madam President, as indicated by Senator Colby Davis and Sweeting, we on this side fully support the bill and the formation and the regulation of the credit bureaus. Nonetheless, we echo our concerns with our colleagues in the lower house. We had concerns about protecting Bahamians, honesty, making sure that things and checks and balances are in place that will not hurt the Bahamian consumer but help them. And we are confident after the member for the leader of the House, sorry, the leader on the side opposite, clearly outlined that there would be no monopolies, and the Bahamian people can be rest assured that they would be protected as consumers. We support that, Madam President. And in clause 22 and 23, which provides for the data management and quality control of credit information by the Credit Bureau, and for the establishment and maintenance of security and system controls in relation to data subject information, we are pleased that the current administration will be watching this and making sure that if there is any issues in the current legislation, they will pick it up in the regulations. But like every bill that comes to this honorable place, there's always the issue of amendments for improvement. So I feel confident that we are definitely on the right track, and the work that we did as the former administration is now being moved forward by the current administration. We are pleased that their input, yes, because it's continuous, it's a relay that we're running in this country, and it's important for us to make sure that the Bahamian people are protected every step of the way from every organization, as long, or every political organization, as long as they're holding the baton, which is a representation for progress for our country. Madam President, I am pleased to learn that the government intends to address the concerns that was brought to the table. The leader on the side opposite, when Senator Henfield was speaking, clarified an issue that was of great concern to me, and that have to do with monopoly and this issue of 5%. And so I'm pleased to learn that. And Madam President, financial services industries throughout our country over the years is one of the things that has brought us to where we are in our economy. It's the second pillar of our economy, and has in fact created many high-paying technical jobs in the sector that has allowed Bahamians and our middle class to grow. Licensing of credit bureaus will help borrowers improve their credit and payment behavior, while on the other hand, lenders access and accumulate information about borrowers and their bill-paying history. It's good to know that, because we all know that if we have access to information about credit, we definitely will find ourselves in a position to make better decisions. I know as a businessman and an entrepreneur, the importance of overextending yourself and having grandiose ideas about a particular project that may not be sustainable. And it is always good that when you sit in front of a lending institution, sometimes things that you may not consider to be important prove to be important, and as a net result, it sometimes bring you back to reality to scale down your project so it can become viable and not have access to additional funding that will require payback. Madam President, the clients of the credit bureaus are basically bank, lending institution, mortgage, credit card companies, and financing companies. With the passing and enactment of this bill, we will create a better credit environment, resulting in a safer lending practices in the financial services sector and lower defaults. It's important to talk about defaults because, and I noticed the lead on the side opposite spoke about statistics only going back from 2016. But I don't want to go into any details. But the same trend that happened in 2016 happened in 2010 and 2011. And so the reality is that I just want the public to know, because 2016 was when the PLP was in government. But the reality is in 2010, 2011, the Free National Movement was in government, and we see the same trends. Well, I appreciate you base your remarks on 2016. Well, you keep saying 2016, so I had to respond to that. Madam President, there's no secret that Bahamian commercial banks are sitting on about $1 billion worth of delinquent loans on their books. An accurate credit reporting system will certainly change the culture and could possibly lower interest rate for borrowers who pay on time. I don't want to boast, but I like to pay my bills. I understand commitments and paying bills, but I would love to see the day that because I pay bills on time and try to keep my accounts up and going, I will be able to have access to better rates of loans. And so I'm speaking that because to the powers that be, the financial institutions, you know, be more, and I leave that like that. Madam President, while tasked with the responsibility of supervising and regulating all credit bureaus, the central bank is currently limited in its powers, and this particular bill will definitely give them more power, more teeth in the legislation in order for them to be able to do an excellent job. Madam President, the passing of the Credit Reporting Bill 2017 will modernize the way lending institutions do business in this country. The bill was long in coming, and I believe it would facilitate the attraction of new lending institutions and better practices, improve the ease of doing business in our country, and strengthen our economy for Bahamians to have access to capital that they truly deserve. Madam President, after wide consultation in the private sector and government agencies extending over 3 administrations, with the passing of this bill, we will finally have fair and accurate credit reporting in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and protect the rights of both the borrower and the lending institutions. I think this is a good time in our history, and I want to commend the leader on the side opposite for the amount of work that he put into the bill. But at the same time, it's important for us to understand that all of us, irrespective of our political persuasion, have a deep concern about the growth of our economy and for Bahamian people to be protected from financial institutions who sometimes can take advantage of individuals because of ignorance. And this brings us right back to the component of education. For us and for the side opposite to devise a plan that will help the Bahamian consumer borrower be able to fully understand the direction we are going in. And this bill is not to hurt them. It is to protect them and to allow them to understand the importance and the discipline that is necessary in order to be a productive citizen in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Madam President, on our side, we support it, and we thank Senators Colby and Sweeting for their input. I also would like to bring apologies for the leader on this side who had a prior engagement, and he wanted to contribute, and he himself said that he agreed with the direction we have decided to take from our side on the opposite. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As many.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you. Just a few short words of wrap-up. Let me first commend all senators on the quality of their debates and the obvious careful thought which went into all of the presentations, some at very short notice, because some of our senators on this side, because I had sent around some talking notes last week, talking points on the Proceeds of Crime Act, to go through some complex provisions and explain them so that they're easy of digesting. They formed the view that we were debating that, and it was only yesterday evening that I informed them that of their misapprehensions, and yet they came with fully prepared speeches, so they obviously had worked into the night. I commend them. Let me say that the question of consumer education is a very pressing one, and we thank members opposite for re-emphasizing what I think all of us here on this side are aware of, is that half of the problem is the lack for decades of any conscious attempt to really reach out to the consuming public, to give them the basic skills, really. Part of that was the resistance that was pointed to. When we first started, though, this odyssey in the public service, when the Ingham administration first advanced nearly 20 years ago, in the 1997 to 2000 administration. So that would have been nearly 20 years ago. It wasn't quite, it was towards the end of it, this idea of putting a cap on deductions from public service salaries. And I remember a person saying, yeah, I only have a couple dollars left, but I have other means of support, and you don't have the right to tell me. You know, and that was the kind of debate that was pushing back. We do have, though, a Consumer Protection Commission now, and I do believe that within their remit would certainly be aspects of consumer education and empowerment. And so I do commend to my colleague minister and anyone else involved with that commission and the protections of the consumer to work with them and urge them to have some formal public outreach, educational programs, even if it's only town hall meetings. Give them to reach out to people who are lost, who are struggling under their debt burdens, to give them some advice as to how they can start to work it. We don't yet have, as they do in more mature jurisdictions, companies that specialize in helping people for a price, but still helping people in resolving credit problems. And perhaps that will be the next step in this country. Other than that, Madam Speaker, I only wish to say that I could only base my remarks on the statistics that were available to me. The central bank, at least in that aspect of its website that I was able to negotiate, didn't have anything going beyond earlier than 2016. Although I'm aware, as I premised in my remarks, that the catastrophe really started in 2008. And even though I wouldn't have the figures because they couldn't get them from the central bank's website about that time, I was in government at that time, as my colleague Minister Folks were, and we know the devastation that the Great Recession wreaked throughout this country on average workers, on the financial system, on borrowing and lending, and the catastrophe really is we're still getting the waves of it. But we are on the mend. We are on the mend. We have a small and vulnerable economy. Let's never forget that. Our options are limited, but we have progressed. And this year, I think for the first time in at least 6 years, we are seeing real economic growth. Not what they would call economic growth that doesn't factor in the rate of inflation. This is growth this year over and above the rate of inflation. it is the half-term point, we know. We are speaking about 6 months' worth of work. But God willing, with continued perseverance, by June this year, barring anything unforeseen or any emergency or crisis, we hope that we will see the continued benefits of heightened discipline in public spending and in our efforts to reignite the Bahamian economy, such that the 1.8% real growth spoken to in the budget communication for the first 6 months will be repeated throughout the economy for the rest of this financial year. And on that note, Madam President, I just note for the record that all members of this place have, during the course of this morning, now been placed in possession with a bound copy of the budget communication made by the Honorable Minister of Finance in the other place yesterday, and a bound copy of the midterm budget performance estimates and documents and findings of the ministry. On that note, Madam President, I now wish to move that the question now be put.
As many as? No, that's when you should ask the question. The question is that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the financial system in order to assure objective credit decisions, to enable credit information sharing and reporting, to provide for the regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services, to provide safeguards for data protection for customers of credit providers, and for connected matters. As many are in favor of the bill being read a second time and committed would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a second time and committed.
A bill for an act to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the financial system in order to assure objective credit decisions, to enable credit information sharing and reporting, provide for the regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services, provide safeguards for data protection for customers and credit providers and for connected matters.
Further second readings and committal of bills?
There are no further second readings. Madam President, may I now, I wish now to rise and to move that the Senate do now resolve itself into a committee of the whole with Senator the Honorable Jasmine Turner Darius in the chair. If I may obtain a seconder.
It has been moved and seconded that the Senate resolve itself into the committee of the whole with Senator Jasmine Darius taking the chair. As many are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The Senate will now resolve itself into the committee of the whole with Senator Jasmine Darius in the chair.
Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I beg leave to move for the adoption of the long title of the bill.
Is there a seconder?
Madam Chair, I second.
It has been moved and seconded that the title of the bill, the long title of the bill, be agreed. As many that are in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those that are opposed, nay. The long title of the bill is agreed.
Madam President, I beg leave to move that the short title of the bill be agreed, if I may obtain a seconder.
Madam President, Madam Chair, I second.
It has been moved and seconded that the short title and the commencement of the bill be agreed. As many as are in favor say aye. Those that are opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The short title of the bill is agreed.
Madam Chairman, I beg leave to move that sections 2 through 54 of the bill be agreed.
I rise to second.
Thank you.
It has been moved and seconded that clauses 2 through 54 be agreed. As many as in favor, say aye. Those that are opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Clauses 2 through 54 is agreed.
Madam Chairman, I beg leave to move that the schedule to the bill, which is tied to Section 39, Clause 39, 2 of the bill, be agreed.
Madam Chair, I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that the schedule to the bill be agreed. As many as in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those that are opposed, nay. The schedule to the bill has been agreed.
Madam Chairman, I beg leave to move that the bill as a whole be agreed. If I may obtain a second.
I rise to second.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill in it as a whole be agreed. As many as in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those that are opposed, nay. The bill as a whole is agreed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I now wish to move, if I may obtain a seconder, that the Speaker do now resume the chair. The President, pardon me. Ow. That wrong chamber. That Madam President do now resume her chair. If I may obtain a seconder.
I second, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Okay. Okay. It has been moved and seconded that the President do now take the chair. As many as in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those that are opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The President will now take the chair. Okay. Madam President, I beg leave to report that the Committee of the Whole has agreed to the bill, having made amendments. Having made no amendments to the bill.
Thank you.
Honorable Senators, the Senator Jasmine Darius, the Chairman of the Committee of the Whole, has reported that the committee has gone through the bill, having made no amendments. Third reading and passing of bills.
There are none. Sorry, Madam President. Oh, yeah, I ready to get out of here too. Madam President, I beg leave to move that the credit reporting bill 2017 be read for a third time and passed.
Shouldn't you read the wrong title? Should he not read the wrong title? Oh, I'm sorry.
If I may obtain a seconder.
Yeah.
I rise to second.
It's been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a third time and passed. A bill for an act to provide for a fair and accurate credit reporting system within the financial system in order to assure objective credit decisions, to enable credit information sharing and reporting, to provide for the regulation of the conduct of credit reporting and credit reporting services, to provide safeguards for data protection for customers of credit providers and for connected matters. As many are in favor would say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Order that the bill be read a third time and passed. Order that the bill do now pass and the title thereof declared to be Credit Reporting Act 2017. Further third reading and passing.
There are no further third readings, Madam President.
I do now order the clerk to take the bill passed today to the Speaker and acquaint him that the Senate has consented to the same without amendments. Consideration of House amendments, resolutions, discharge of select committees, notice for future meetings. Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Michael Darville.
Thank you so much, Madam President. I would like to renew all notices standing in the names of the members on our side. In the opposition.
Thank you.
Madam President.
Chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Carl Bethel.
I beg leave, Madam President, to renew all matters standing in the name of the government and give notice that at the next sitting of the Senate, which we propose will be held on the date adjourned, we will adjourn to a date certain, being the 2nd of March. We propose to invoke what would be called in the other place the order of the day, and we would wish to debate for second reading and passage the Proceeds of Crime Bill and the Financial Transactions Reporting Bill. Thank you.
Orders for clerk. Adjournment. Adjournment.
Madam President, I beg leave to move that the Senate on its rising do adjourn to Friday, the 2nd day of March, 2018 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.
It has been, is there a
I
second?
second the motion.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate be adjourned to March 2nd at 10 a.m. As many are in favor would say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The business of the House is adjourned to March 2nd, 2018 at 10 a.m. Final adjournment.
Madam President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn.
The Senate stands adjourned to March 2nd, 2018 at 10 a.m.